Hello, everybody, and welcome to our third installment of Babble on Babylon. We are going to be talking about Season 3 of Babylon 5 here. Please welcome back to the program, Mr. Jonas Kyratzes.
Hi. It's very nice to be back.
So I'll stop asking how my pronunciation is because we're just probably going to assume that we've gotten to the limits of my
It was good.
capabilities.
It was good.
We're okay. And we'll just jump straight into it here. So seasons 1 and 2, for people who didn't happen to catch our previous review, I think the only real difference between me and Jonas on reviewing those seasons was that what specifically we loved the most. Like, it was pretty much, I mean, they I don't know if I had any complaints. I might have, or if Jonas had any complaints, he might have, but for the most part, it was all positive. I'm sorry to say, Jonas, season 3 I had a rough time with. I'll just start by saying that I had a rough time with season 3. What did you like season 3? Same as season 2? I don't know. What? Give me a little perspective on that.
Oh, I like it more.
You like
I
it more?
definitely
Okay.
like it more.
Okay.
Yeah. To me, 3 and 4 is where it gets really going and the really big stuff happens. And I like that. I like the breaking of the norm. The we have set up a world and now things are going to happen in it. I'm curious, what was your experience and how come it was rough?
So yeah, I mean, that actually makes good sense to me, and I can understand that in the sense that, you know, the amount of like really significant plot points that happen in like seasons 1 and 2 is definitely kind of minimal. Like, you know, in terms of like, if you're talking about like at epic space kinds of things, 1, not really that much, and 2, a little bit, but not that much. And whereas 3 definitely there's a lot more things of like massive consequence occurring for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So that does make good sense to me. But so if you remember in when I was talking about season 1 and 2, and I totally agree that I'm kind of in the minority here. It might just be because I have, you know, having programmed for 35 years, your brain gets like 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 it gets like inexorably rewired to have a really like hard dependency relationship management system in there that you can't really turn
Mm-hmm.
off. And so one of the things that I loved about season 1 and 2, and I think I kept going on and on about this, where I was like, everything felt like it was like lined up so that there was explanations for why like each thing was plausible, or why this character would have to do this thing at this time, or that, you know, you weren't seeing things happen that didn't have a good establishment for that they could happen at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does this
Mm-hmm.
make any sense what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah.
So the problem I had with season 3, really, we'll talk about it in more depth, obviously, because that's what we do here. But really, you can boil it all down to, I felt like that really went away in season 3. In season 3, for me, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the things that happened, I didn't feel like they made much sense in the context where they were happening. And
Mm-hmm.
it could be that it could be because of the fact that the show accelerates in the way that you're describing, where there's a lot more of consequence that happens, so the scope
Mm-hmm.
is
Mm-hmm.
broader and the setups smaller than they were in previous seasons. When you're only dealing with small occurrences, then you don't need to have as much context for them, perhaps. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but it may just be that they stopped being as meticulous about it, either on purpose or by accident. So I don't know if that makes any sense to you, what I'm saying. Maybe you don't see how it relates to season 3. We'll get into that. But like, does what I'm saying make any sense at all, just in
Oh,
the
I
abstract?
understand that conceptually. It's just
Okay.
that practically, to me, season 3 feels very much like it follows from the previous
Okay.
seasons.
Okay.
But maybe that to you, like for some reason, it didn't gel with you individually, and
Right.
that it does with me,
Yes.
and that I feel that the one leads to the other, and you feel that it doesn't.
So that's probably what we should explore in more detail. But let's start off with a couple things first, because there's some things that have nothing to do with that I kind of wanted to mention. As I mentioned in the previous 2, the the humor in this series remains excellent in season 3, even though, right, it's very traumatic in a lot of ways. There's a lot of bad things happen in season 3. Some good things happen too,
Mm-hmm.
certainly. uh but even things that are fairly dramatic, I'll bring up Londo and Veer in this season. I think the actors have really settled in to the characters at this point, and they know just how to play them to perfection. And two, the writing for those two characters still like remains outstanding. In particular, there's a sort of a sequence where a Centauri like seer tells them that they will both be emperor, and one of them will be emperor after the other one dies, right? And the way they manage to get so many looks at each other and like untrustworthy like actions. Do you know what I'm talking about? This scene and a couple of these scenes are so beautiful. So yeah, I don't know what you thought about that, but I loved all of that.
No, I just agree with that. Yeah, that's there's so many layers of humor to those two characters, but because they're also tragic and grand,
yes.
and there's also this earthy kind of humanity, so to say, in them, and that's it's I don't know, just the way they look at each other, just these glances and everything, and the interplay between those two is just is golden. Yeah.
There's also a particular phrasing when at one point Londo Mollari says something that was so funny to me. It was so subtly funny to me that I just burst out like laughing uncontrollably. He sends Veer. He gets an appointment for Veer on the Minbari homeworld as an ambassador. And he kind of does this as an act of kindness. He kind of sees the degree to which the inherent corruption of Centauri society, which again, this part, like I said, I have no complaints about this part in season 3 either. I loved all of it. Mollari is both like complicit in this very nasty thing that they are doing, but also somehow conflicted about it all the time. And it's like almost like a die roll whether he tries to fight it or goes with it. And I felt like that felt really real. It felt like, again, a lot like what a real person might be like in that scenario, torn between like sort of a little bit of inherent greed and tradition, also just like what they've used to doing in their head, versus this kind of like moral twinge of like, I'm pretty sure this is not the right thing to do, and I have almost a little bit of a moral compunction to me to do something different, and I'm wrestling with those two things in a very real way, right? And at one point he sends Veer to go to the Minbari homeworld as an ambassador to kind of get him out of the line of fire of these very nasty things that are going on. Because he sees how hard it is for Veer, who is really much more good-hearted and much less indoctrinated into the Centauri way of doing things as compared to Mollari. He's just kind of a person who was born with a better moral compass, it seems. And so when he does this, of course, Veer ends up doing a humanitarian thing under the radar. He tries to smuggle Narns off of the homeworld, where they have a very harsh, almost slave labor sort of lifestyle that they're being forced to live, and to get them out into some place where he could fake their death so that the Centauris think they have died, but in actuality they've gone to some other place to live, right? It's basically just another Underground Railroad, a lot like Dr. Franklin's, where he tries to basically disappear people who are under some kind of threat and get them to a better way of life. So this is all great, and you see the conflict, and at one point, Londo Mollari finds out about this, and the phrase he uses to describe what Veer has done, he says, "I should have known if you went to the Minbari homeworld at some point, you'd go native." Do you remember this line?
Yes, I do.
So to me, this line is so amazing because normally saying going native is usually a pejorative term used to talk about someone who becomes less civilized when they are embedded in a less civilized culture. Right?
Yeah.
But in this case, like, Veer has become more civilized. He's like a better human being, but from the Centauri perspective, it's a corruption, right? And that phrase, it was so good. It was so good. Yeah.
Yeah. That is excellent. Yeah, it's a very good observation as well.
That just I don't know. I write down some things as the show goes on here just because I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
bring them up as we went through. So I loved all of that stuff. I loved the sort of "you'll be emperor" thing. There was also a scene where Londo, he has like a bug problem in his.
Oh
Do
my
you know what I'm
God,
saying?
that is incredible. That scene is so funny.
Yes.
And I think of that often when we have some horrifying creature inside the flat or something, and I think of exactly that scene.
Yes, that scene to me was just. And again, it's really just there's not much writing in the scene. It's really just like they probably at that point knew that the actor had just absolutely Peter Jurassic, I think, is that his name,
I
or
think it's pronounced Jurassic, but
Jurassic,
yeah,
Peter
yeah,
Jurassic.
yeah.
He like they must have just been like, okay, this is totally working. So if we just kind of like have him have to have some bugs in his place that he's really afraid of, it will come out great. And they were absolutely right. That entire scene's amazing.
I mean, the dialogue is all. There's no improv on B5, like almost at all. There's like two lines in the entire show, but yes, the way that he just goes
Yes.
for it and is fantastic, and also such a contrast with the rest of the stuff, and it keeps the character in your heart. If
Yes.
he didn't have any of these scenes, you would just start hating him.
Yes.
But he is still the same Londo from season one. Just things have changed.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. It's almost like it's a very good example of how to do the pacing of the types of scenes for a character who you will both love and hate depending on
Mm-hmm.
the time, and that's not an easy thing to always pull off, right? I mean, people take it for granted when it works, but there's a lot that goes into making that work, right? And
Yeah,
they do
yeah.
the exact right amount of that for both Londo and Veer, which is impressive, especially because they are not like it's not the Londo and Veer show. They are one of many characters who have to be managed, and they do a great job of keeping that going for the entire time. You never forget about them or only hate them or only love them, right? It's always got you in just the right place, which yeah, it's pretty great.
Yeah, yeah. It's a big difference to what a lot of shows do nowadays, where a character will be nice and then inexplicably will be an asshole
Yes,
all of a sudden.
yes,
And that's just who they are now.
yes.
Or they misunderstood something and now they're behaving like a lunatic. This is who these people are. We know why they are this way. And yeah, that makes it much more layered and interesting and relatable.
So, maybe I don't know what the best way to tackle the rest of the stuff is on season 3. I don't know if it's to go in order or if it's to take this this opportunity to segue by talking about there was one thing I didn't like about what
Mm-hmm.
happened with Londo.
Mm-hmm.
And this, I guess, is probably one of the smallest. Well, you know what? Let's not go there yet. Since we're on humor, let's just finish that off. I'll just mention there's one other thing on the humor front. Much like the joke about a duck being a cat that was with Londo and Veer, they managed to pull another one of those. So I'm already ready for that in this series. You've already shown me that trick once, but they got me again, where there's a scene in season 3 where Jakar is sitting down to eat, and he says, like, he's got a general with him who he's like,
Oh,
right?
uh-huh.
You know what I'm talking about? And the general's like, this is great. How did you get? I can't remember what it's called, like glean or something. It's some weird word. How did you get that from the homeworld, right? Because their homeworld's occupied. You know, the Centauri are probably preventing them from doing it, right. And he's like, oh, it's not. And he's like, but it tastes just like it. And he's like, this is actually an Earth food. It tastes just like it. I guess everyone has this. And the guy's like, what's it called? He's like, Swedish meatballs. And it was such a great pull because it's like Swedish meatballs are funny just in general. And pulling that out at that time, yeah, that was great. So yeah.
And it's a good observation because if there's one food that everyone might have, little round bits of meat is not that unlikely.
Yep, some kind of sauce with a rolled up meatball, right? Like,
yeah, like you could imagine a lot of different ecosystems producing something like that.
yes.
but it is also just very, very funny. Um, there's something the show does so that I really like with just having these very dignified, serious characters, all these very, grim characters like Londo, and then just kind of having these moments of goofy humanity that I love. It just gives these characters something totally different, and the humor with Jakar is so essential because he starts out so angry and
Yes.
and then becomes something quite different over time. But the humor is what grounds him. The humor is what makes you love him. That and his immense sex appeal.
I mean, that hair, quote unquote hair.
Mm-hmm. All right, yeah. Anyway, go on. Yeah. So
Okay.
that was the humor, and
So moving on, I'll give the most. This is the simplest possible example I can give about
mm-hmm.
what kind of started to throw me off on season 3, and there are bigger ones which we can talk about, but I want to start with the smallest possible thing, just so I can
Okay.
maybe try to describe what hurts my head when it happens in sort of a microcosmic way. So sticking with Londo Mollari, there is a scene where he sits down with Lord Rifa, and they are having a conversation. At the end of the conversation, Londo Mollari tells him that he has poisoned his drink. I assume the scene I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He explains that it's a 2-part poison, so you drink the first part, and it's kind of just like, sits in your system, possibly
Mm-hmm.
forever. Like, it's just, who knows how long this stuff lasts, but presumably a fairly long time. And then if you ever drink, like, the second half of the poison, you are killed.
Mm-hmm.
So in my mind, I'm like, how is that ever a thing? Poison, we already have poison that you poison someone once and they die. So if you
Mm-hmm.
ever wanted to poison somebody, it only takes one step to do it. So threatening someone by saying, I did the first step of a poison and I will still have to do the second step to poison you. But by the way, I always could have just poisoned you in one step anyway, is no different than sitting down and saying, if you don't do what I tell you, I will poison you. If anything, it's a bad move because now that person knows to be careful of you, and it makes it less likely that you'll be able to poison them in the future rather than more likely. So in my head, I'm like, nobody could have possibly thought this through. It doesn't make any sense. It's just saying, if you don't
Are
do what
there?
I say, I will poison you.
I mean, are there in the real world like 2-part poisons? That might exist. That might be a thing.
But no one
I mean,
would
I can
want them.
certainly.
Like, why would you ever
Um,
use it?
it's a good question. I mean, it doesn't bother me that much because on some level, I feel like it's also just a threat, more of a like it's already in your system. You see, I can get to you once, I can get to you again. Um, I I can understand your objection to it as a kind of okay, it's a little bit too storytelling-y, it's a little bit too television-y or something. Um, but it doesn't like hugely bother me, if that makes sense. Like it doesn't seem insane. It is a bit complicated, but as a threat, I can handle it and be okay with it. If you see what I mean.
I do. And the reason I picked that one is because, like I said, it's kind of throwaway. Like, it doesn't really matter. So
Mm-hmm.
I'd be like, okay. But the reason that sort of stuff hurts my brain so much is because it makes the world feel less like a real world to me when things like that happen. Which, like I said, happens all the time in most shows. In my standard punching bag of Star Trek Picard, like every scene is a 2-part poison. Every single scene, there's something where you're like, wait, if that existed in the world, then
Yes.
none of these
Yes.
things make sense or whatever, right? And Babylon 5, the reason I say this sort of thing was kind of disappointing is because honestly, with the exception of maybe a few things I would really struggle to nitpick, I really just never had that feeling in the first 2 seasons. And that was one of the things that was so remarkable to me. it was so well thought out that you never had anything like that happen, and it made the world feel so much more real. And so, like, this was an example of now it's like, well, maybe I could believe that for some reason Centauri do this two-step poison thing because it's sort of a ritual. They're like, look, I have to poison your drink once as a thing that we do. But they didn't even do that. If they had said, I have just done the first step of blah, which is sort of like, right? You see what I'm saying?
I get what you mean. Yeah, I get what you mean. Well, at the same time, it just doesn't bother me.
Yes.
But I fully get why it bothers you.
So that was all I wanted to set up with that. If you get that, then that was it.
I don't feel that this is the result of not caring. I think, to me, this is the result of saying, I want kind of a cool Centauri way of poisoning someone that's kind of threatening and scary, and it's already in your system, and I'm going to fuck with you.
Yes.
Rather than saying, okay, I don't give a shit, I'll just write whatever.
Yeah. I do agree. And also, I think they have a certain love for the two-step poison, because if I remember correctly, in the very first episode, or I should say the pilot, because I guess what's the first episode is maybe different depending on where you watch this or something. But in the pilot, this same exact scene happens with the original captain and Jakar. So he says something like, I poisoned your drink with something I can remotely activate. It's a lie, but it's another like two-step poison kind of thing. That one makes more sense because I can activate it at any time is more of the kind of thing you would want to do to threaten somebody, because then you don't have to put anything in their drink anymore, right? But it seems like this was something the writers liked or thought like they like that sort of thing because it's happened once before.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, to me, it sounds kind of appropriate for the Centauri.
Yeah.
While at the same time, I understand it sounds perfectly to me like something Londo would do.
Yes.
I have poisoned your drink and I'm going to poison your other drink and then you'll die. Sounds like Londo to me. I think that's why it doesn't bother me.
That makes sense.
But at the same time, okay, yes, it's maybe not the best of concepts in the universe.
So let's go over, I guess, now some more in chronological order, because I think now we can just talk about the season, and hopefully that makes sense why that bothered me now, because, like I said, all my complaints are of that form, meaning the thing that troubled me about this season is I felt like that sort of thing was happening a lot, and so I do think if you don't mind that sort of thing, then I don't think that there's a lot of problems with season 3. If you do mind that sort of thing, then I think season 3 starts to be a lot harder. If the reason that you were so in love with Babylon 5 and 1 and 2 was because they did such a good job of avoiding that sort of thing, might be another better way to say it. So I still enjoyed it to the extent that, like, I like the characters, like the performances, and in general, I feel like they still managed to come up with interesting ideas that happen. I just felt like that world cohesion started to fall apart for me, and I'll try to point out kind of more specifically why.
Okay, I mean, like I said, for me, it's kind of almost the opposite experience.
Yeah, which is interesting.
Now it's starting to, cohere more. But yeah, let's look at it.
So, sort of in the first few episodes, I think, I guess I would say the first episode, maybe 1, 2, 3, was a little bit weak for me. And then 4, I thought was quite strong. So 4 was the episode with the monks, I believe, if I'm not misremembering.
The monks are introduced a little bit earlier, but then 4 is the one with the mind wipe.
Yes, with the mind wipe,
death of personality, and all that. Yeah.
So let's talk about the first 3 briefly, and then let's talk about 4 because I quite liked 4, and there's a lot to talk about there. So the first 3, I thought there were a couple things that were just a little bit like that I had a little bit of trouble with. It felt a little bit rushed almost. So in the very first episode, they get the White Star, I believe is the name of the Minbari new, like, it's sort of like a light attack vehicle. I don't know. It's not like a big heavy cruiser, but it's also like pretty strong. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's a very powerful sort of hybrid, part organic.
Yeah, maybe like a destroyer class would be kind of more what it is. I don't know. But they get one of these, and the very first thing that happens to them is they encounter an actual shadow vessel. And the sort of idea, at least, is that the shadow vessel probably could kill them if it wanted to, but it doesn't want to because it doesn't recognize the ship type. This is a hypothesis. No one knows if that's true, but that's like Delenn's hypothesis anyway.
Yeah.
And so they end up destroying it almost immediately by creating a jump gate inside of a jump gate, basically. It's like jump gateception, which causes like an energy feedback thing, which apparently they knew from, Earth experiments, but Earth doesn't have any ships that go fast enough to outrun the blast, so it was never something that they did on purpose. So I struggle with this a little bit because, again, it all kind of just happens. And I tend not to really like, from a storytelling perspective, if the answer to a problem that confronts characters is explained in exposition that happens during the confrontation, I tend to not really care for that. If we had established the fact that jump gates inside jump gates cause explosions earlier in the series, I would have much more enjoyed this, right? But as it is, it just kind of rolls out, and you never really. So it's an example of what is supposed to be a dramatic or tense situation that to me just falls flat because it all kind of just it plays itself out within itself, and it all happens so quickly it's hard to really enjoy. Does that make sense?
Yes, I would argue, however, that this is partially set up for later episodes when they have to fight shadow vessels and don't have a jump gate. Like the idea is they got away, by sheer luck they had this setup where they could do something. So I think partially I agree with what you mean, but I think partially this episode is itself set up for the later conflicts with the shadow vessels. So
yes.
But I know what you mean. It would have been nicer, obviously, if it had been set up further. But then again, I also would say it's not something that seems external to the logic of the show. Like it's not like on Star Trek where sometimes a completely new form of physics is invented for the purpose of that episode. This, it is very conceivable that this is what would happen if you did this to a jump gate. I find this at least consistent with what's shown before in the series.
Absolutely, and it didn't bother me in any way, meaning it wasn't like something that I thought was like, okay, that's kind of hokey. It made perfect sense and seemed fine. It's just, it doesn't feel very satisfying. So I felt like the episode itself was more undercut, not the world, because sure, yeah, that could work. But it made the situation kind of just sort of play out almost on autopilot, because it's like, oh, what do we do about the shadow vessel? Oh, well, I heard, or, that you could do this thing, and then we do the thing and it works. And it's just kind of like, it doesn't lead to a very satisfying sequence, whereas just a few changes could have made that sequence like actually much more exciting, because it would be like, oh wait, but they could do that in the jump gate, and and so on. And I think they also, like I said, they do a good job explaining why not everyone is doing this. Like, the standard problem in Star Trek would you be like, okay, well, why aren't we always making jump gates inside jump gates? If this is the what's the word I'm looking for? I can't remember. This is the Last Jedi. Hyperspace is the best bomb problem, where it's just like, why isn't this how all of your technology works? They did a great job of keeping that out of the way, so I had no complaints there as well.
Yeah, and okay, as much as I love Babylon 5's kind of setup with the episodes being standalone and yet contributing to an arc and all of this, and I think it was revolutionary for its time, and also does a lot of things I still think hold up tremendously in terms of structure. They, I think, kind of had to, at the time, treat the beginning of the season almost like a soft pilot again. Because it was, months later, people back then tuned into season 3 of a show. Not having seen season 1 and 2. Now only my in-laws do that when they find a show on Netflix starts on season 4, and they just start on season 4. But back then that was normal. And so I do think the first 3 episodes in particular suffer. I think if it was nowadays, it would start from the point of intensity that season 2 ended at, and there is a bit of a slump, and then it rebuilds to the intensity, but there is a little bit of a slump as you try to bring in the new audience. Season 4 does not have that. Season 5, unfortunately, has it a lot, but that's for other reasons that were outside their control.
Well, and I also think that, like, when I'm talking about the season, I'm talking about it when held to my highest standard, right? So the other thing is, I also appreciate that this was a struggling show. I mean, it was, like you said, it was low budget. They didn't have, tons of huge name actors. Like nowadays, shows are just made completely differently now, and they would have had a lot of, a lot of affordances that they did not have when they make it. So it's not a knock on the writers at all. And like you said, they managed to do things that, like, I mean, basically no one else was doing. So even in their worst moments, I'm sure if you went back and compared Babylon 5 to the kinds of things anyone else was doing, it's way ahead. So I'm talking about this, in hindsight as well. I'm just saying, like, yeah, if you assumed the perfect possible world where you could do anything you wanted, that was something that I noticed, right?
Yeah, no, but I mean, since I hold to the idea that this is a very good show in and of itself, independently of when it was made, it's legit to say, there's some things that don't work for you that work for me, or the other way around. There may be episodes that you like that to me are more like, eh. Anyway, episode 4 is Passing Through Gethsemane, which is about a man who was a murderer in a previous life. Who was a murderer and was sentenced to the death of personality.
Yes.
The serial killer. Yeah. Which is the total wiping of your mind, essentially.
Yes.
Of all your memories.
Yes.
A truly horrifying alternative to the death penalty.
Yes.
Which is really, I think, thought-provoking.
Yes.
And then, anyways, some people, some former, victims or the relatives of victims go through a whole thing to bring back like the suppressed parts of his memory that are still there. And it's a very tragic, very moving episode. It's my wife's favorite episode of the show, and for me also, it's very powerful because it's about, I don't know, forgiveness and grace, and it's very hard. It's very hard because you kind of understand everyone almost in it, and the central horror of this punishment is very hard to deal with, because you could say on some level, well, it's better than the death penalty. He's not dead. And yet, in a way, it seems almost worse, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard to articulate why.
Yeah. Well, I guess
you didn't kill the person. They're still alive. They just have a new set of memories. They're a new person. Isn't that a better outcome at the end than someone just being dead? And yet you recoil at it.
And I guess I would say from a writing perspective, I feel like this, again, this was probably one of my favorite episodes in season 3, I would say, because it takes itself and the world very seriously. We already know about this. We've seen it happen. In fact, Talia Winters is asked to do sort of like a final inspection on, like we've seen this process in an earlier season. She's asked to do a final inspection of someone who is going to have his mind wiped, and we get to see what that process actually entails. And then we kind of don't hear about it again for a while, but then it comes back again, and now we're going to spend some time examining what that really means. And I love that because, again, every time you raise an idea in a show, I like if they make maximal use of that. Like if they go, wait, what would that actually mean? Like what are the actual like philosophical issues or ethical issues here? Let's explore them in more than just the one time that it happens to come up in some random episode. Let's actually pretend it truly is happening in our world. When would we see it happen? And what would it mean for our characters, right?
Yeah.
And so this... sorry, keep going.
Go on.
So I loved this episode, and one of the reasons I loved this episode was because it actually also says something really interesting about a kind of prejudice that we don't have today, really, but that would exist in the future. Because currently we think of like, oh, well, if you don't like Italians, then you're prejudiced against, people who are sort of Italian or something, right? But this is a different kind of prejudice where it's like, it's literally the exact same person physically. And the characters who have seen what this person has done cannot get past the fact that it's not the same person anymore. And you see this twice. It happens both with the people who come to kill the fugitive, who's not really a fugitive, and also with Captain Sheridan, who at the end, when it flips around, can't bring himself to shake the person's hand. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Exactly. I was gonna mention exactly that. I think that's a really brilliant moment in the episode
Yes.
because we identify with Sheridan, I think, to a degree. We understand that reaction
Yes.
because we really loved the character who died and we're very angry at the man who killed him.
Yes.
And yet it's the exact same situation.
Yep.
It's exactly what the other guy went through, and we're reacting in exactly the same way as those people did who killed him. And that's very powerful.
It also says something about the death penalty, in a way, right? Like, there's a lot of arguments for why you should or shouldn't have a death penalty, or why people do or don't want death penalties. And the notion that revenge is something that a certain set of humans just feels viscerally compelled to get is kind of explored in this episode, I think, very well, where it's like, look, society already effectively got rid of this person to the extent that you could ever say that you really got rid of an actor, their intent of an agency, of a being with agency is gone. But the people who were wronged by that can't move past it. It is just a hardwired prejudice in their heads that they can't move past. And I think, like you said, having it happen twice in that way, once where we are unsympathetic and once where we are, is a great way to just show, like, this is revenge. This is what it is. Like, it's where it comes from. It's that, like, kernel inside you, right?
Yeah, and it's really thought provoking. It's a very complex setup. It makes you think about, the identity of an individual.
Yes.
Like what is an individual? What do we value? Why do we think that death, like if you executed someone, it would somehow be less cruel than to wipe their.
Right.
Is it because on some level we what we value is the how do I say, the sanctity of a continuous conscious experience?
Yeah.
Like that's what matters. And that's why we're so also obviously horrified by Alzheimer's and similar diseases.
Yes.
Because they attack that, and what we value isn't necessarily life or death, but sort of the continuity of someone existing, and just putting a new mind in that body, and that messes with our idea of a cohesive self in a very, because it makes you realize that a lot of people, including us, on some level, assume there's something like a soul.
Yes. Yes.
Even if you say I don't believe in that, and then you see this example, and somehow on some level you assume that there is some entity that continues from the one to the other, or it doesn't. But it's difficult to wrap your mind around your own response to it.
Yes.
I think, because you don't feel entirely comfortable saying, no, that's just something totally separate, that new person. Or if it is, it's some kind of violation of something that we feel shouldn't be violated.
Well, in our minds too, I mean, at some level, even if a human consciously doesn't believe in anything spiritual or souls, inside your own head, it's kind of obvious that human beings create mental structures that sort of model the other people that they know. And that model is based on the visual, like when you see that person, you recall that chunk in your brain. It's a whole model of like what that person is like, what they've done, what you know they've done, what you know they've done to you or to other people. You have this whole like model in there. So in some sense, even if you don't think there's anything spiritual, the soul of other humans exists in the brains of the people who observed them, whether you like it or not. And it takes a tremendous amount, I think, of mental discipline for someone to undo that automatic, just by seeing someone, you map it to that place and you think that that is who that is. And like you said, even if they have Alzheimer's and they're acting completely differently, or they had a brain trauma and they're no longer who they were, I imagine it's just very hard to like rewire that part. It takes a long time to undo that mapping you've done. So a copy of the soul's in your head, whether you like it or not.
And that also relates very much to the difficulty people have with people who have committed crimes in the past.
Oh,
That's, I think,
yes,
something very relevant nowadays,
absolutely.
where we all, on the one hand, talk about how we want society to be less, carceral, and everything shouldn't be just about punishing people and sticking them in jail, while at the same time we demand everyone go to jail for tweeting a bad thing.
Yes,
Um,
yes, yes,
and there we have to think about, someone commits a crime, goes to jail, comes out, and people are like, oh, you did this, you did that, but it's been 10 years or something. Sometimes it's been a year, but people undergo radical changes, and in a way that's the same thing. Your model of that person is completely off.
yes,
Like,
yeah,
that person may have regretted things, may have had some kind of spiritual revelation, may have changed their life in some way, and and they are essentially not the person that you knew, and yet you're looking at them and you see the person that did something that you think is terrible, but that person in some way may also be almost dead, that you knew is certainly a very different thing living inside that body now. And you have the same kind of response that Sheridan had, even after a very long time. Someone who did you wrong, someone you really disliked for whatever reason, you may be quite wrong about them, and it's difficult to overcome that. And I like that Sheridan is human in that.
yes.
Like, from a storytelling perspective, I like that his response is the wrong response. And he sees that and he tries, but you see that it's difficult for him.
And I think that, when they sat down to write this episode, or when they were plotting it or whatever, if you wanted to revisit this idea, there are many ways that you could have done it. Like, there were many possible reasons why someone on the station could have their mind wiped or need to have their mind wiped. And so I give the writer, well, I guess it's just one writer in this case.
Yeah.
I give the writer tremendous credit for specifically picking the monks as well, because having a person who is very steeped in forgiveness, whose like whole thing, like their whole like ethical framework is based around forgiveness, which a hardcore like Christian monk kind of person, that's their whole story is forgiveness, right? That's the whole
Yeah.
thing.
Ideally.
Like I said, a monk, not a random Christian, I suppose. But that's their whole story, right? That's their whole difference between Judaism and Christianity. Textually speaking, is they're supposed to be all about this redemption narrative, right? And so picking someone to be there as the third person who's just all about emphasizing forgiveness makes a tremendous amount of sense when we talk about capital punishment and those sorts of things. It was just a very good logical choice that helps emphasize, and it makes sense why that person would encourage Sheridan to forgive this person, because that's the nature of his job, basically, as a father.
I like the writing a lot on Brother Theo.
Yes.
And I also really like the performance, because you see, I think, that it's not easy for him. It's that he does it, and he doesn't have particularly like hatred in his heart or anything. But it's not that, oh, I just forgive everyone and it's the easiest thing. There is a kind of a pain to the performance.
Yep.
At all of the things that are happening, which is, I think, why it's also so important that, again, he is forgiving towards the murder at the end as well.
Yes.
It's like he has to practice what he preaches. He has to stick to that. And yeah, that's something very powerful and moving. I say that too much, maybe, but that's kind of the things that I care about with a show, the things that really kind of touch me.
Well, I do think this show in general has religious undertones that work. And I think that's actually kind of hard to do in shows and in sci-fi shows. It's easy to be kind of trite with it, but we talked about how great the scene was in season 1 with the humanities having variety of religions and stuff. And I think, like, in general, season after season, even in season 3, which was my least favorite season, the religious themes work very well. Like, they get religion on this show and what it means to humans and how it works in a way that shows rarely do. Even shows that are ostensibly about religion rarely do, to me.
Yes, it understands it's not religious in and of itself. The show is actually more humanist, I
Yeah,
think, but it
exactly.
understands the yearning and the for spiritual truth, for meaning, that all these very different people have in very different ways, and it respects it, but not in this kind of bullshitty, oh, we're going to do a bit of diversity now, and
Yes.
we're going to show this guy, oh, he's a Muslim, oh
Right.
good.
Yes.
But it really, it respects that all of these people are looking for something, and that it's meaningful to them, and it may be true, it may not be true. It doesn't necessarily always comment on that, or it does in complex ways, but it believes that it's legitimate to look for meaning in this way, even if not all of us agree with that or find that, or and if not all of it turns out to necessarily be true in the classical sense,
Yes.
as with the
Yes.
Grail.
Yes. Well, and I would point out that in this season we have another religious arc, sort of. It's maybe perhaps less obvious than some of the other ones, but part of this season is Jakar, sort of finds Jesus in jail, in a sense, you might say. That's not really what happens in the literal sense, but he is incarcerated because he attacks Londo Mollari while on drugs. Literally, that is what happens. And he becomes sort of different as a course of the experience. And I would say it's a little hard for me to contextualize necessarily because I haven't seen seasons 4 and 5 yet, and I suspect we'll see some more things that perhaps relate to this in those seasons. But in a way, he kind of goes, I might say that if you take, as we find out at the end of season 3, which I'm sure we'll get to later, if you take the sort of concept of chaos and order, which you kind of mentioned in the last time we talked, you might say that Jakar kind of has an experience that makes him go from being more chaotic to being more orderly. He sort of like has a reflection on what is necessary to bring the world back to one that he wants it to be, and he sees it less about sort of guerrilla warfare and more about this sort of like spiritual crusade that encompasses everybody and not just him. And I don't know how to really put that into perspective yet because I haven't seen enough of the show, but I mean, hopefully what I'm saying makes some sense there.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a very big part of his arc to, without spoiling too much, becoming himself a kind of spiritual leader.
Yes.
From someone who was technically the spiritual leader of the Nan on the station and did believe in it, but believed in it, I guess, more ritualistically,
Yes.
more as tradition.
Yes.
And now he has an experience that there are some very beautiful scenes about this later on, even in the like I said, season 5, the beginning of season 5, I would consider the most flawed part of the show because of external things that happened to the show and that made it very difficult for them. But it has scenes ultimately with Jakar that are so superb to me personally, that are about religion and his own growth and beliefs that you'll see. But that's very much part of what Jakar is all about and what his story is all about. So that continues through season 3, and then obviously evolves further in 4 and 5. Jakar is a character who changes very, very radically over time, and I love the performance so much. I can't. I have no words for it. The sort of dignity that starts surfacing in this very cranky man.
Yes.
Is quite remarkable.
Well, and I still don't really quite know because they haven't explained it, but in the pilot, he's sort of is implicated in attempted murder, I want to say. I mean, like, I believe, and I'd have to go back and watch it again because I didn't know any of the characters or what was going on when I first watched the pilot, obviously. So watching, some of those first episodes again, so maybe some things I missed could sink in a little bit better. But I thought that, like, he was kind of responsible for ordering Ambassador Kosh to be poisoned. Am I wrong about my remembrance of that episode, what happened there?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit more to it, or there could have been, but it also has been so long since I've seen the pilot that I would make some kind of mistake, presumably, if I said something. But but yeah, he's very villainous in the
Yeah,
beginning.
yeah,
He's very destructive,
yeah,
and he's very much, a guerrilla fighter.
yeah, yeah.
He's there to fight basically.
So I liked all of that. I liked Jakar in this one as well. There's a part where Londo, with Veer's unwitting assistance, uh, actually helps Jakar uh, f- get rid of Lord Rifa, which of course benefits Londo Mollari. He does not do it out of the goodness of his heart. But that whole part worked pretty well, I thought.
Oh,
Too.
I love that
Okay.
scene.
Well, you could talk about that for a little bit then.
Um, is that yeah? That's and the rock cried out no hiding
Yes.
place. I love Babble and 5 episode titles. But yeah, I don't. I probably take too long to explain everything, but yeah, it ultimately leads to a sort of conspiracy to get rid of Lord Reefer because it's advantageous both to Jakar and to Londo.
Yes.
And it's set up very nicely in that Reefer thinks that he's winning,
Yes.
and it suddenly turns on him, and he is brutally murdered.
Yes.
And it's I think, very intense scene. It's very beautifully done and very layered to me. It's set to this song that's being sung by the choir back on the station, so it's intercut between these two things, which creates a funny but ultimately very creepy and discordant kind of combination, I think, because the lyrics aren't that, the song is really upbeat and funny, but as a lot of religious songs go,
Yes.
the lyrics are quite creepy.
Yes.
And you're very, very happy at first when it turns around, because Lord Reefer is a bastard.
Yeah.
And you're very happy to be rid of him. You're very happy that Jakar isn't going to die.
Yes.
Because the tension and the threat of it feels very real. And then you're very happy. But then Reefer is so pathetic when he dies. And it's not even the actual scene where he dies, but the scene leading up to it, where Jakar just says, you can destroy this part of him, but please leave the face. We'll need that for identification.
Yes.
That is so brutal. And yet it's played by Jakar without any pleasure, without any joy. And that's not Jakar of season 1.
Yes.
And you'll notice that the Nan kill him, but Jakar walks away. He does not participate.
He doesn't watch. He doesn't even watch, really. As soon as they kick him to the ground, he basically turns and walks away. Not really. Like, I wouldn't say he does it in such a way as to indicate that he can't bear to watch it, but he does it in such a way that he's like, I don't need to watch this. Like, that's not what I'm here for, or something, right? You could definitely get the sense that, like, he's not enjoying this in some kind of perverse way, like he might have done in season 1.
Exactly. He understands that it must be done. It's not wrong. The scene is not a scene of something happening that shouldn't happen.
Yes.
This is a good thing for the world.
Yes.
But it is still terrible.
Yes.
It's still awful. He does not enjoy it. He takes no pleasure in it or anything like that. It's just, it has to be done now. There is no way around it. And the combination of all those layers of that, to me, that's one of my favorite scenes, just because it goes from terrible danger, twist, things are going well, to leaving you with this lingering discomfort.
Yes.
That you won, but it was ugly.
Yeah.
And I love that scene.
It also felt a bit, like, to me, it felt pretty authentic to what I would imagine. Like I said, I think of Centauri as kind of like Romans almost.
Yeah, there's a million parallels
in a way, and it felt kind of like something that happens. Like we bribed the guards to leave this guy stranded so that some slaves could kill him. Sounds like the kind of thing that would happen in some kind of Roman back alley, right? Like, just sounds like,
for sure. Yeah. Stuff like that has happened. The guards kill someone. Yeah. The guards vanish and someone else kills someone. Break into the palace and kill someone.
Yep.
That has happened many times in Roman and Byzantine history.
So to me, that was like, this feels like how Centauri politics probably worked, because, it just felt good. Like, I was like, they didn't try to make it be some big fist fight. Like, I fundamentally, I just don't like action scenes very much. I mean, they're fine, but I just don't care. And so I much rather see something like this where there's like, it feels like the kind of thing that would actually happen. It's kind of rare that people martial arts fight out something, but that's how, modern shows do stuff. This is more how it would happen. It's like, yeah. Like, people get set up in a society that has like an emperor style structure. They get set up and they get backstabbed and then they're dead. There isn't a giant fist fight usually. If there's going to be a battle, it's usually with actual armies on a field somewhere, that kind of thing.
Yeah. You have the occasional thing like this in B5 with Marcus and the Rangers, and it's okay that for me. I like a little bit of adventure, but I don't like the kind of thing that happens in a lot of shows now where Detective Bumblefuck is pursuing the killer, and then in a New York deli or something, and then suddenly they're like jumping into the air and kicking each other in the face.
Yes.
That was very bad in the 90s, especially when suddenly martial arts were fashionable everywhere. But even now, sometimes you watch shows, you're like, what?
Yeah.
So no, that's good.
Well, and even on that front, so I don't care for that sort of stuff. So Marcus as a character doesn't really do a whole lot for me. But I will say, on the positive side, the one time he really has a big duel, I did like that because, again, it's the context of the duel was important and seemed to be happening for a reason. There wasn't two people who randomly encountered each other and start fighting with staffs. It's actually when it's like, okay, Delenn needs to be sort of like ordained as the new leader, and Marcus is going to try and delay the person who wants to challenge her for long enough for her to be ordained, knowing that he may die or is likely to die in the process. And that all felt great too, because it's like, this is not really a fight about who wins. The story context as a whole is more important than the fight, which is more where I am okay with it, right?
Yeah, and I mean, there's a sword fight in season 1 with Londo, and that's also that
same way. Good point.
And it's that's fine. I don't mind that.
Yes.
I also don't mind. You know what? I don't mind an action scene where something is resolved.
Yes.
I hate action scenes where they just punch each other for 9 hours and nothing happens.
Exactly.
And at the end, they both run away or something.
Which is most of them now, because they're all like characters that have to keep going. So
and they're all immortal basically anyway. They're all super gods and mega robots or something. I agree. That's very unsatisfying and thankfully B5 does not have that.
No, they do a pretty good job of that sort of thing. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, in terms of the sort of standalone episodes, there's also Exogenesis, which I guess it's not one of my favorites just because I prefer the arc stuff in this season, but I quite like the idea that they did an episode about the scary parasites that take people over, and it turns out they're completely benign and friendly.
Yes. Yes.
It's a very rare inversion of that kind of story.
And the humans are the bad guy. Like that's what's kind of interesting is it's like, no, actually it turns out all of the people were probably benefited by having the parasite, and one person's life is actually made significantly worse potentially by the fact that we tried to intervene, which is not the parasite story that you ever see in science fiction, really.
Yeah, it's very unusual, and I like it for that.
I agree that was a nice episode.
There's another Arthurian episode, Late Delivery from Avalon.
This one, I did not like that episode. So if I was to contrast it with season 2, I think I said, the Inquisitor episode for season 2 was an example of how to do a Star Trek style episode perfectly, where it's like way better than Star Trek to me. This was an example of just a Star Trek episode. This is the kind of thing that I don't like.
But I mean, it's not. He doesn't turn out to be Arthur or something. This is just essentially a man who's mad. To me, the episode works quite well because it's very much in keeping with the overall themes of the show, of the Arthurian themes and undertones of the show. And I mean, it doesn't like I don't know. There isn't really that much of a twist to it, right? Like, it's just somebody who's kind of glommed onto this particular narrative after undergoing a tragedy. So I think if there
Yeah.
was some twist to it, it would bother me more. But as it is, I'm kind of quite fine with it, and I love the performance very much in the writing. I love the scenes he has with Jakar. Um,
Yeah.
those are extremely funny and sweet, and it's not the best of the episodes, but I find it quite charming, I suppose.
I think what it comes down to is so to I think what it comes down to is holodeck or not holodeck. So let me explain that a little bit. So if you're the type of person who wants to see sort of a genre mix, meaning like you would if you want the Reese's peanut butter cup of we got some people talking Arthurian and wearing chainmail in the middle of our futuristic sci-fi thing, then this episode works in the same way that a holodeck episode would work, which is to say that it's bringing in elements that really don't seem to belong when you look at them
Mm-hmm.
in this context, because it's like, why would anyone even have chainmail in this future or something like that, right? And why would
Lapas.
what?
Lapas, they're all
Yes,
live action role plays. You just stole it
yes.
from some
It'll never
Lapas.
die. It'll never die.
No, it won't.
Or talking about Arthurian legends and stuff and so on. But for me, I just find that kind of thing distracting. So when there is no particular reason for it, meaning, and I don't mean reason for it in the sense that, like, yeah, I mean, it's conceivably possible that someone in this world could have a traumatic incident and kind of go crazy, and maybe they happen to be someone who just read Arthurian legends all the time, so they're very familiar with them and they take that persona. I mean, it's possible, but why? Right? Like, in the context of this show and this world, why is that happening? And to me, it just seems like because we wanted Arthurian legend to be in here right now, and we just thought that would be interesting. But to me, it just feels kind of out of place, right? It's like it doesn't... In the way they did it with the Inquisitor, there's a real reason why this would happen. Like, it ties into the world completely
No,
organically,
I agree.
and not
If
this
anything,
one.
this
Yeah.
is more like the Grail episode than like the Inquisitor episode. In that the station kind of attracts these kinds of figures. But
Yeah.
to me, there's a lot of like elements that make sense. I mean, thinking of the station as Camelot. Because not only there's two levels of Camelot here. You can talk kind of, JFK Camelot,
Right. Oh, right.
talk,
Yeah.
actual Camelot, and I think there's the kind of parallels and references to both of these things. So to me, that this is one of sort of many layers of illusion, but it is a bit more whimsical, I suppose, or a bit more. It's not. It's not exactly like magical realism or anything, because doesn't turn out to be Arthur or something, but it is in a slightly different mode, I suppose, of storytelling than the kind of not exactly hard sci-fi, but you know what I mean, the kind of so it's a little bit more mythological, but to me it ties to themes that have been present for a long time on the show. They're not new. This whole Arthurian thing and all of that. And I don't know. I find it relatively graceful as an episode. But I do agree. Beyond that it is a bit standalone, and the more standalone episodes have a little bit of that Star Trek feel sometimes. Again, it just doesn't bother me in this case. I think it works maybe better as an episode than the Grail episode does, even though I quite like the Grail episode.
The Grail episode was... I understand why you're likening those two, because they do have a little bit of that sort of like, well, we're hearkening back to something here that doesn't really exist in the world of Babylon 5 in the present, and we're sort of like bringing something older from older humanity into this now. But the Grail episode was more grounded because the character is not delusional, right? And people aren't referring like Marcus literally starts talking to the person as if he is Arthur, and Arthur's responding. it's a very implausible, sort of almost silly thing to think of happening in the middle of a
Oh, but
gigantic
you know
galactic
what?
civil war. It's
I
just
there I actually disagree. There I
okay.
actually disagree because I think there's something very it's something like a performance, and I think because the man really kind of fits the bill and sounds like it and acts like it. I don't think that Marcus thinks. I don't know if there's actually a line about this. There might be, but it's almost like he wants to. It
Sure,
would be
yeah, I mean
such
that
a
could
it
be.
would be such a relief if it was real on some level. Um, and I can relate to that, the desire to, even though you know it's just a performance, just for a moment to imagine, to play along for a little bit, because it's so refreshing, because it moves you in some way. um I I can understand that, and I can understand that particularly with someone who is mad in a way, because it's real to that person. So for just for a little bit, you can pretend that it's real for you
I see.
too. I think there's something infectious about that. But that's I think that's a matter of taste, really.
Well, as you said, LARPing perhaps never goes out of style, so Marcus may just be like, look, I've been LARPing this entire time, and I'm going to keep LARPing, so if someone shows up pretending to be King Arthur, that's the opportunity I've been waiting for this entire time.
I mean, Marcus is a knight,
Yeah.
right? That's what he is basically, and the Minbari do have these very archaic institutions. So he is kind of in a mindset where that makes sense to him. I think Garibaldi thinks that guy's Arthur.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
think he wouldn't be prone to thinking something like that. Anyway, I think that covers a lot of the more standalone episodes. There is Grey 17 is missing,
Oh,
um,
yeah, right. I have
which
something to say about that episode
is a very
later, but
infamous episode. I believe that's the one where Joe Straczynski said that he had a fever and he doesn't remember writing it. He wrote it completely while sick.
wait, why is it?
Um,
What was weird about it?
I don't know. People just think that it's a bit clunky,
Oh,
like
okay,
especially the bits with the abandoned part of the station and
okay,
Garibaldi and the monster,
okay,
and
okay, okay.
everyone thinks that one is a bit off, including the creator of it. Personally, I don't mind it. I find it amusing. Like the kind of horror monster bit of the thing is just kind of funny. It's not special.
Yeah, I didn't have a problem with that. I don't recall thinking anything odd about it. I immediately thought when the dummy shoots him with a tranquilizer, I couldn't help but like think. In fact, I think I literally said out loud a quote from Blade Runner because it reminded me kind of the creep of J.F. Sebastian's house. Do you know what I
mm-hmm,
mean?
mm-hmm,
Apartment.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I didn't have a problem with it. I don't remember thinking anything was particularly strange about that episode. I agree that probably it's not the most interesting thing, but
See,
yeah,
that's the episode most people hate, like the most in the entire show or something, and you're like, "Oh, it's fine."
I've
So it's
long come to
very,
I get it. Like I just don't obviously watch shows the way other people watch shows. I am always going to be in the minority. It seems. I literally don't. I don't think I wrote down a single comment about that show. I was like, all
oh,
right, that's just an episode.
I don't hate that
Okay,
episode. Like, I
okay.
don't agree with the people who think it's like, "Oh my god, the worst thing ever." It's just not quite as strong as what surrounds it for me, I guess. Like, I find all the other episodes surrounding that very moving, and this one is just like, okay.
So let me talk about one other thing that I really liked before I talk about the stuff that I really didn't like, which is mostly more about sort of the back half, the maybe the
Mm-hmm.
uh, oh, and I should say one thing that I expect I would have liked and didn't end up getting a chance to like because of something I think you told me before, which is that I assume now after having seen season 3, you had told me that Talia Winters they had to get rid of because of the actress left. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now that I know, because I didn't, when you said that, I didn't know yet that season 3
Uh-huh.
would reveal that telepaths can actually mind control the alien ships because there's a person inside them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or a
Mm-hmm.
being inside them. And so I'm so disappointed now because at least if it were me and I had done all this work to set up the fact that Talia gets a special gift from her ex-lover, who turns into an energy being, right? In season 2 or
Mm-hmm.
1 or 2, probably 2.
I think one.
Or was it
One?
1?
I don't know. No, maybe
No,
not.
it's well, in season
It's
1.
one.
It's
I think
season
it's
1,
one.
yeah.
Yeah.
That was probably destined to play a very important role because she can do things that no other telepath could do, and now we know that telepaths are critical as a frontline
Yeah.
force for this, and I guess we just never get to see that because the actress left. That's so sad to me
I
anyway.
mean, we see the story play out. There
Yeah.
are other telepaths. There's Lita.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of things that do still play into it, but it's a flaw, and I'm sad for it.
Yeah.
And there's nothing you can.
No.
There's nothing they could have done, right?
Nope. Yeah.
It would also have been like a very, very early depiction of a lesbian relationship,
Right, that they didn't get to do.
That would have continued, and they just couldn't do it because the actress left.
Yep.
And so they were planning on that. But it is okay. When I watch the show now, it doesn't bother me. I understand. Okay, this character essentially dies.
Yeah.
And just shit happens. Sometimes people who are going to make a big difference in the world, they die.
Yeah.
Like the show doesn't mess it up for me in some weird way, and
Yeah,
it has an impact on the people and all that. But yeah, I didn't know whether to mention it to you or not ahead of time, because I think it is very frustrating still that this happens.
I can just I'm fine with it. It's just I am a little disappointed because I'm disappointed for the writer. I'm just imagining myself in this position of having this cool thing I worked on that I wanted to go a certain way, and then just literally through no fault of my own, I can't finish that, this story I was trying to tell that was really quite good up to that point, because some actress decided to go to a different show and we didn't have the money to keep her or whatever, because, it's just sad.
Answer, yeah.
It's just sad because...
That happens a few times throughout the show where random things kind of influence. Thankfully, the show is constructed in such a way where then kind of alternatives open up.
Yeah.
And it still manages to do what it does, because I have seen shows where somebody dropped out and they just kind of dropped the story at that point completely, or something. So they just didn't know what to do anymore.
Yeah.
And to me, the story as a story still hangs together, but there are a few things that's also what impacts season 5 at some point. But also in other places, just what can you do?
Yeah.
If your actor develops a serious mental illness or leaves or whatever, there's just nothing you can do.
So another thing, like I said, well, 2 more things. One, so I want to talk about something I really liked, and then 2, I'll talk about some of the stuff that I didn't like in the back half that I felt was really that made it hard for me. So there's sort of a subplot, fairly lengthy actually. I didn't want to mention it last time for people who didn't want spoilers. Franklin is addicted to stims, and I thought that was great because you'd seen it. It'd been there throughout, and it was very subtle. But if you were paying attention, you could sort of see that he had a drug problem, before it actually is revealed that he does. It felt really well handled. And in this season, he finally acknowledges that. Garibaldi has been trying to get him to acknowledge that he has a problem, and he eventually does. There's a fairly lengthy sequence of episodes where he kind of decides to take time off to figure out how he can get himself back together and deal with this problem. And it culminates in what I thought was this actor's, again, I don't know any of the actors' names on this show, but
Richard Biggs.
Richard Biggs. Yeah. It culminates in what I think was absolutely a standout performance. He gets stabbed in an alley, and he effectively sees so having seen his interaction with his father, I felt like the writers did, I don't know whether this is intentional, but to me, I read it as, it's almost like he sees a vision of himself that is almost his father, or the good parts that his father instilled in him. Not the bad parts. There are some bad things that happened as a result of his relationship with his father, but the good part of the man that his father raised, right? And he effectively gives himself a talking to, and I just thought it played out beautifully. The entire scene I just thought was great. I don't know if maybe I am over interpreting that, but I really enjoyed it.
No, that scene is one of my favorites in the show.
Me
It's an
too.
incredible performance. It's very powerful. It's very much this the way that he speaks about wanting to live in that moment when he's
Yeah.
dying. It's doubly sad because the actor died very young.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he died 20 years ago.
Okay.
Almost. He died 22nd of May 2004, I think. It was the day after my birthday.
Oh
That's why I
my
remember
God.
it.
Okay.
He died. He had some sort of aortic tear. I don't know, some kind of heart thing, I think, or
Oh.
some kind of very rare thing. He was like 40 something and just basically dropped dead one day, despite being super healthy and everything else.
Mm.
And rewatching it gives it this very sad dimension. That's true of all of Babylon 5 because like a tremendous amount of these actors have died extremely young.
Weird. Is there like a curse of Babylon 5?
Yeah, that's what people kind of semi joke about, but it's very very unfortunate. A
I
lot of
didn't know
them
that.
have died. Yeah, a lot of them have died. Partially, I would say, it's not just it's that the show also gave parts to unusual people who had drinking problems, for example, and
Ah, okay.
it cast in ways where some other people might not have given these people a part or
I see.
whatever. But it's also just bizarre, terrible luck, to be honest, and it's very very sad that so many of them have died. Anyway, but the that episode with Franklin is that entire sequence is very powerful. The way that he's kind of looking for himself. There's an episode earlier on when he briefly has a relationship with a
Yes.
woman, and
Nightclub
it
singer.
ends on this image of of him kind of through glass, kind of.
Yes.
It's very hard to describe why that is so moving to me, but it is. It's his quest to find himself and kind of come to terms with himself. And I don't think it pulls a lot of punches. Like I think
Yes.
it's very real about the pain and difficulty of it. I also like how he gets there to begin with, which is that for the longest time his drug use is okay.
Yes.
He has it under control
Yes.
until he doesn't.
Yes.
I think that's depicted really well, and it makes a lot of sense with who he is because he's trying to do everything, right? He's trying to run his regular job. He's running the thing in Down Below. He's doing this. He's doing that. It's too much. Nobody can do it all.
Yes.
But he tries to take all the burdens of the world on his shoulders, and eventually he kind of buckles. And it's a very sympathetic portrayal of this. It also strengthens his relationship with Garibaldi, who himself has had
Exactly.
addiction problems, and the fact that Garibaldi's the one who goes and says to him, "Look, man, you have a problem."
Yes.
So yeah, and I like the relationship between those two because it builds very organically until they're friends. A lot of the friendships and relationships in the show, they kind of just happen over time.
Yes.
And in a way that I read, there's not the episode and now we're friends. It's
Right.
just kind of,
yes.
It's there over time. They get to know each other. They do stuff together. They build a history, and then suddenly it's like, yeah, those people are friends, and you feel it. I like that.
I also from a cinematography standpoint, you pointed out the scene where where Dr. Franklin is viewed through sort of like a I believe that scene he's walking, and he walks behind a sort of a piece of glass of the camera.
It's a wall made of these glass panels, basically,
and it kind of refracts. I think that like it's a good example of using a camera to tell a story because some context for people who maybe don't remember this episode. So this has happened before. The woman who is a singer at this nightclub, she holds up a little glass, like a drinking glass, and looks at him through it, right? in sort of this way of saying like, oh, I just feel like, if you can hold it just right, you can see someone's soul. It's kind of like a trite thing to say, like something a hippie might say, right? Like just kind of almost like a throwaway, and you don't think much of it at the time other than, whatever, that's, a thing. And it's a great example of using cinematography to tell a story, because up until the very end of the episode, nobody, not the director, not the actors, not the screenwriter, is acknowledging that there's any truth to that. Meaning it's just something a character who is not a particularly authoritative character, they're just a nightclub singer, they have no special insight into the meaning of life or anything, is doing. But at the very end, by having the actual camera, the thing you are experiencing the world in, and the director is moving around, right? By having that show that same shot in the exterior world, it's sort of saying, yes, that really is true, right? It's like, it's bringing that out into the wider context. It's like, yes, his soul actually is fractured in this way, or is multifaceted in this way, or something, right? It's a good way to, it's an example of how a camera tells a story that, it's easy to miss, but it's happening.
Yeah, and I like that when she says it, it's not played as being the most significant thing.
Exactly.
It's just a little moment, and you don't think of it that much, but then it really hits you at the end. And it is the kind of thing that you can do with art that you can't entirely put it into words. I think the best art is kind of that something you can't necessarily describe exactly how it functions.
Yes.
Because if you could, then you wouldn't need to make the art.
Yes.
It's just, it's an image that instantly brings to mind all these connotations and ideas.
Yes.
And fits exactly right with what this character is experiencing, without being trite.
Yes. Yes.
Like I recently saw a terrible movie called The Last Duel, Ridley Scott movie.
Okay.
Horrible, and it's all this. It's this real world historical kind of story about two men who fought because one alleged the other raped his wife. The movie unfortunately takes some very significant liberties, but then you see kind of one of the versions of the story, and then there's like the scene where one horse rapes another horse and stuff, and
what
you're just like, it's so, I mean, there's just a very, very banal metaphor in the movie that is so banal that you're just watching it and you're like, this is like something out of Wayne's World. This does not belong in a serious movie. It's embarrassing. And you can do this thing and do it really wrong, right? You can have something symbolic in a show that's evocative, but I think it's evocative if it's not like a one-to-one metaphor for one thing.
Yes.
I think powerful visual metaphors, they evoke something, but they evoke something multi-layered. They're not just, this is the good thing and this is the bad thing and this is a metaphor for that thing. And you want a hamburger and the clouds form a giant hamburger. Like that doesn't work. It needs to be something less easily condensable to one line, one meaning, but something that just kind of makes your mind open up to various kind of ideas. And I like this one. I know it's a lot of talking about something so simple, but up until the camera does that, you have you don't have an emotional state.
Right. Yes.
And then it does that and it just hits you as being incredibly powerful. And I really love it when shows do use this kind of visual storytelling, and it's not just coverage of the actor saying this and then saying that, and then it's over and everything is exposition. But this is a moment created on the screen, and the show has those, thankfully.
Well, and in general, I would assume it's hard to analyze, but I would assume that if you take a look at sort of the history of metaphor, I would assume that it looks a little bit like the history of science, where it's like, originally, people used metaphors because it was easier to use a metaphor to convey something complicated than it was to show the complicated thing. So the metaphor was a good device for communicating something that was hard to describe otherwise. Like, the reason you employ the metaphor was because it helps get across certain intangible things that if I literally just showed you in the writing the exact thing, it wouldn't land. Like, you wouldn't get the impression in your head that, or the thing that I'm trying to say wouldn't make sense. And then that is impressive when someone does it well, because it is intangible and we can't talk about exactly why that thing made me feel this way. Like, it's tough. But then that creates the incentive. People now think that the good thing is the metaphor.
Yeah.
So now they just make a metaphor. They're like, why did you need to show the two horses doing that when you could have just shown the actual thing, and that's actually clearer? And it's like, well, because metaphors are better. It's like, no, they're not. Like, they're not better because they're metaphors, right? So I feel like there's probably this bad thing that happens in writing where now people think the goal is to make the metaphor because it makes you look cool or something, right?
Yeah, it's the same thing as thinking that stories should have a message.
Yeah,
rather
right.
than
Yes.
a theme.
Yes.
A theme is something complex that you explore.
Yeah.
A message is just something, well, write an essay if you want to,
You just say
if
it.
you want to communicate something, just say it. This is bad, that's it, you know. But if you want to engage something in a more complex way, yes, you can take things from the real world and then transform them and have a complex experience through art. But if, to take an example from a lot of things recently, you go like, there's a guy called Monald Drumpf in our story, and he's very bad. It's like, why didn't you just say it? Like, there's nothing to this. You're not, you might as well just say the original thing. But if you want to talk about authoritarian governments or the decay of institutions or something, you can do that. But that's something more complicated, and you can create a fantastical world or something out of that. But people tend to reach for this kind of allegorical thing that sometimes maybe works, but very rarely, because most allegories are they're didactic. They're just like, this is what you should believe. The end, and that's generally not very interesting, because either you already agree or you didn't agree and you're not gonna.
And it's in some ways it just piles mental work onto something for no reason. Like, normally, the goal is that it's supposed to be communication of some form, that, or exploration of some form or something. Like, you're supposed to be doing something. And if you could have just accomplished that same thing exactly in a much easier way, you just wanted to say this thing was bad, why are you wasting everyone's mental energy grappling with your incredibly complex 50 times removed thing when you really didn't do anything with it, right? It's just extra work for everybody that doesn't accomplish anything, right?
Yeah, if all you're doing is shifting the names around
exactly.
a little bit, essentially, it doesn't matter. If you're really remixing things, that's a different experience.
Yes.
Okay, should we then turn to the kind of main stuff of the season, which we've kind of avoided so far?
Yes.
Which is, personally, of course, the irony is I think that's my favorite stuff.
That's my favorite stuff. Weird. This is so weird. Okay, we're going to figure out why we had such a different reaction. So here we go.
I mean, the first part, I suppose, is especially the sequence Messages from Earth to Severed Dreams, which is the point where the Earth government becomes so authoritarian and so destructive that Babylon 5 breaks from the Earth Alliance, which to me is possibly my favorite thing, not of all time, because there's also the end of season 5, but I suspect you'll still like. But to me, those 3 episodes represent like a high point of television, really. Like, the way that the tension builds and builds and builds, and they manage to resolve the problem once, then it comes back. They manage to resolve it again in a kind of television-y way. We come up with something. It's okay. And then you come to Severed Dreams, and it's just not okay anymore. There's no more solutions. And still, to me, the moment when Sheridan announces and says, as of this moment, Babylon 5 is seceding from the Earth Alliance, that just gives me goosebumps, because it is such an impactful moment. It is the entire show cracking in two, and just, it was always a show about, we're the Earth Alliance, we work for the Earth Alliance, we do these things. And it's not, we're temporarily going to go against our bosses. It's like, this is it. This is the end. The show can never be what it was before. It is now a civil war. And that's I find that very, very powerful, and everything, like the way that it builds to it, but also that entire episode. um I don't know. I find this particular effect of, I mean, apart from the actual story, the effect of, we have created a certain reality and we have shown the tensions in it, and we have come to the point where the tensions can no longer be resolved, that these things can no longer be reconciled with each other, and you're going to have to take a stand. You're going to have to do something, and it's probably going to cost you. That I adore, and that entire episode to me builds just such a fever pitch of intensity. And when I remember seeing that the first time. Of course, I don't think that I have a nostalgic kind of attitude towards it, but still, it's this feeling of, I can't believe it went there, and it's not going to go back from there. So that I admire very much about it, and yeah.
So I have no disagreement. I loved that part as well. I think pretty much everything I didn't like happens after that. So the second
Mm-hmm.
half of the season. I will say there is one thing that it didn't bother me, but I didn't think was done as well as I would have liked during that sequence. And
Mm-hmm.
that is how Delenn was handled, and I'll explain why. So, to me, pretty much most of the first and second season, as far as what's happening with Delenn, she is really trying to figure out what she's going to do about her race and
Mm-hmm.
the upcoming. I mean, I think she more or less sees this fact that there's going to be a point in time. It's part of their prophecy. She seems to have a pretty good handle on what it's going to be. I don't think this event takes her by surprise at all, really. And so, to me, how she was going to resolve this crisis is a major part of her character. Incredibly
Mm-hmm.
important for us to see. It kind of just goes out with a whimper in a lot of ways. She literally just walks into a chamber, gives about a 1 minute speech, and then everyone's instantly on her side. And it
Well, no, I mean, just part of them are on her side. I think it's
all but the
that
warrior
story isn't
cast, right?
done yet.
I know. To me, it was just like that plot wise is the correct thing. I feel like it's like, yeah, like probably what should happen is she convinces part of the people to go. Like that feels right. But the scene, it wasn't enough. Like there wasn't enough of that in there. I
Okay.
wanted more. Like I needed. So if I was to contrast it, Franklin talking to himself is an example of this exceeded all my expectations about how this would resolve itself. I knew it was coming. I knew they would have to do something to have this character go through a transition. I didn't know what exactly it was going to be, but I knew it would be something. They totally like massively over delivered. I'm like, that was amazing. Like you said, it's one of my favorite scenes in the series. I like I'm just like duly impressed. The Delenn one, it just felt like a letdown. I was like, it's fine. I'm not going to complain about it. It wasn't something that bothered me about the season at all. But I wanted more. I wanted way more. Like, to that scene. I don't know. I'm not a writer on Babylon 5. I have no suggestion for what I want in the sense of like, well, if it was me, I'd do X. I just
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I wanted them to deliver the way they had delivered in other times, which is admittedly a high standard, and I felt like it fell short of that rather high quality bar that they established, to be fair. I'm judging them against themselves, which most other shows would fail at to begin with. But it didn't have the teeth. Does this make sense?
Okay. No, I understand that while not having the same reaction.
Okay.
Like, I
Okay.
like the scene a lot. I think it's very powerfully performed. And it leads to this kind of big moment. The council must be broken, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, it's less, I would say like a third of that episode. And the main focus, of course, on Earth. I mean, yes, it's
Yeah.
two things breaking at the same time.
Yeah.
Um, but in a way, it's not really the climax of that story. So there's still a lot more to come on that front.
Yes.
So I think to me, it serves its purpose inside of that episode, and then we'll see more. We'll see more about this and where this ultimately leads. I think, in a way, yes, this is a very big moment. She breaks the council. She has some people on her side. She comes to the aid of Babylon 5. She does change the political situation, but there are some very kind of big moments in how all of this still is going to play out later on. Does the knowledge of that change how the scene feels to me? Maybe. I don't think so.
Well, let me give a more concrete example, maybe for you to say whether you do or don't think, right? It's like so I can pick out like a very specific thing and just see maybe it's totally different for me than for you. So in that scene, there is literally a part where she literally breaks the council. She takes a staff that is clearly like a important symbol of leadership for this Grey Council. I assume it would have been given to her if she had accepted the leadership position before. So it is kind of like it's almost the chairman of the board, right, in a sense. So this person has great authority, presumably. She takes it and she snaps it in half. This is what happens physically in this scene. There's dialogue and this happens physically.
Yeah.
There was there was not even a recognition that this was momentous almost. She almost breaks it as a matter of course. Like, I wanted to see more difficulty there. I wanted to see more resistance from them. The fact that she could literally just take this from one of them with no resistance was weird. She didn't even really speak to that person directly so much as indirectly. It just didn't feel like as momentous as it was. And maybe, like you said, maybe I'm interpreting it as a more momentous, but I don't think I am. I mean, she's literally breaking the ceremonial staff. Yeah.
It is a big moment. I understand it. It's still, like I said, I don't react to it that way because I kind of, to me, it's in her words and in her performance, and that's kind of what I focus on. And it's almost everything else is almost not really there. It's this abstract moment more where we're focused on her and what she's doing. And I fully understand that criticism. Like this, you could arrange a different version of this, where there's a stronger reaction for them, where maybe more of them have distinct characters and stuff. Which I think would have been financially impossible.
That may be true. Or more from her too. Like more. The determination was good, but the callousness almost wasn't for me. I read her as being less. It didn't seem like breaking that staff meant to her what I think it probably should have on my read of the character up to that point. It was like a mismatch between what she thought she was doing and what I thought she was doing, which may be on me, but that made it hard for me. Like, to me, that character breaking that staff, that would be probably one of the most horrifying things she'd ever done in a way. Like that's like her basically admitting that her entire way of life up to that point was not a lie, but had a lot of lie to it, because it is now being dissolved in a way that she never, I would imagine a year ago, would have never dreamed she would do that. I mean, maybe she would, but you see what I'm saying?
But I think that's actually more interesting than bad.
Okay.
There is a hard edge to Delenn.
Yeah, I agree.
And that comes out sometimes. And her relationship with her own religion, I think, is more complicated than it seems.
Yeah.
Like I said, like we had said with the Grail episode, she believes in believing. She believes in the concept of faith.
Yes.
It is revealed in this season what is behind Valen and the entire concept of human souls.
Yes.
And she knows, and she acknowledges this in season 4 or 5, that it's not souls, it's gene transfer. That what they're measuring is just the presence of human genome
Yeah.
in Minbari.
Yeah.
Um, and yet she still has her faith. But her faith, I think, is less in the exact mythological, like she's not so much interested in the law of her faith, so to speak, I think, than in the sort of grander notion of people standing for something, fighting for something,
Yeah.
that we're all on this great journey to make the world a better place, and all of these ideas. But there is a degree of, not exactly deviousness, but she has an awareness of the difference between like the official version of the religion and then what she believes.
Right. Yes, that is true.
Um, so she is both an innocent, true believer, but at the same time, she does she does understand politics, and like the politics of her world,
Yes.
in a less foolish or innocent way than you might think. Um, I think that's an interesting dimension to her. Um, so I don't mind that. Like I don't mind seeing the harder edge of Delenn that we do see on occasion. Um,
And it didn't
when
bother me
necessary.
either, like I said before. It was more I wanted more from it, and not
I
like
can
nothing in
understand
that
that.
scene was weird. It wasn't like, oh, why is she doing that or something. Like it's like it all made good sense in context. It
Like
was
I
yeah.
don't actually disagree with you.
Yeah.
Like if the show had minutes to burn,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, I would I would also say you could give more to that episode,
Yeah.
or to that scene rather. But the show is the episode is so dominated by the beginning of the Earth Civil War.
Yeah.
Um, by the way, I have to say, when it comes to visuals, the CGI may be outdated, but every single time in Severed Dreams, when the one ship rams the other one,
Yes.
when they're burning, and that's
Yes.
the only thing they can still do.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think I've not cried watching that. Like, it hits me so viscerally every single time, as an image. I don't know. I mean, I know why. The music is
Yeah.
beautiful. The
Yeah.
image is beautiful. It's very, very powerful, even though, it's done on technology that your phone could now it could do better than that,
I
but
would
it still
say
works very
in
much.
season 3, I felt like they did a remarkable job for what they had to work with at the time. Season 1, the effects look bad. By season 3, honestly, they really don't. I mean, you can tell they are dated, but they are not dated in a way that you can't enjoy it. Like by season 3, I felt like the CG is good enough. And I'm
Yeah, yeah,
cranky about those sorts of things for sure. I mean, I'm a graphics programmer at the end of the day, but I
yeah,
felt like they got by season 3, they got to the point where it's like I can enjoy watching this. It's not really, it
yeah,
was not
yeah.
bad. And some of the space battles they do with so much stuff going on for that time period on a television show is really rather remarkable that they were able to accomplish it, honestly.
Yeah, and the thing about it, I think, is that the design is good.
Yes.
So the shapes, the choice of
Yes.
colors and
Yep.
textures is really good. The lighting is
Yep.
good. So it looks sufficiently dark when it needs to,
Yep.
when you've got the stars and all that stuff. And the motion is good. Like, you see this with a lot
Yes.
of old CGI, that stuff just doesn't move right.
Yep.
And the ships move with proper velocity and
Yep.
turn realistically and all this
Yep.
stuff. And the combination of all these things is really effective. Like in season 1, there's a lot of stuff. The station, I think, looks pretty good in season 1,
Yeah.
because they've clearly put a ton of effort
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I keep noticing this, that at certain times there's these little lights around the station
Yes.
that illuminate parts of
Yes.
it, and they give such a sense of scale.
Yes, they do.
And I'm like, yes, that's such an easy thing to do, but it's such a good choice.
Yes.
Like watching some movies lately where there were things that were supposed to be enormous, but I never got the sense of scale as much as I should have. And
Yes.
I thought of that, and I was like, just adding those little lights gives me such a sense of how big it is. So there's real craftsmanship that has gone into this, despite the extremely primitive technology on which it's being done.
And the Minbari ship design I thought was particularly good because it's very organic. It looked like fish, almost like beta fish floating in space.
Yeah.
Which, again, like from my perspective, I don't really care about spaceship design, but I do care about knowing who is in what ship and when. And I feel like they do a good job of like, because a lot of times you need to know where are the Minbari, where are the humans, where are the shadows. That's a pretty important, those three in particular are pretty important to know where they are in a battle. And they did a nice job of making those ships so distinct that it would be very hard for you to not know where at least they were in a particular space battle, right?
Yes, and I like that the ships communicate something about the species. So
Yeah.
you've got the humans; they've got relatively tech that we can imagine, that we could almost build, except for the gates and all that stuff. They're like
Yeah.
they've got rotating sections and
Yeah.
all that. The Minbari have artificial gravity, and they have these elements of organic design of organic
Yes.
technology. And then the Vorlons are just full on organic.
Yes.
And the shadows are also full on organic, and you also look at them and just shit yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because they just look terrifying and weird and alien
Yeah.
and just bad. You just don't want to be near one of those things. And so they just communicate something about what these civilizations are and where they are in history. The kind of roughness of the non-ships and everything it's very nicely distinct.
Yes.
And it relates to the storytelling. Beyond that, I don't care
Right.
about
Me too. Yeah.
the spaceship design, but I care about what it represents, what the idea of it is. That's where it's interesting to me.
Yeah, and that ships feel like they're, that they were designed by what we know about the people who designed them. Yeah, is a nice touch, right? Because it helps like ground that and make sense why their ship would look like this.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't matter beyond that. I don't need to get into the nitty gritty of it, like, oh, this is like that. I'm not particularly interested in the sort of science fictional lore of it, so to say. I just like what it communicates.
So let's get into the back half of the season, where I think is probably the only place where we're really going to disagree. Because like I said, all the rest of the stuff we kind of talked about, I was like, meh, if I didn't like part of it, it was a mild, it wasn't like, really bothering me or anything like that. So we'll start from mild. They actually go in order almost. Like I started out with something that mildly bothered me and ended with something that really bothered me.
Okay, that's strange.
So the mild thing is, it was like the only time I didn't believe the characterization of Londo Mollari. He is, by definition, like steeped in a culture of manipulation, thievery, backstabbing. Like his whole world and like how he thinks about it is about who is doing what to try and make me do something or not do something, right? Even to the point, and I thought this was a very good characterization early on in the show, to the point where he is very suspicious of the shadows helping him. Even the entire time they're doing stuff for him, he doesn't really trust them, right? You remember, what I'm talking about in like season 1 and 2, right?
Yeah.
We get a scene where Mollari doesn't want to work with Morden. He's already sent them away a long time ago at this point. Morden decides to try and re-ingratiate himself with Mollari by poisoning Mollari's lover, who is coming back to the station. It's such a transparent ploy. It literally happens like on the same day as Mr. Morden has a confrontation with Mollari. And that Mollari doesn't 100% see directly through this ploy felt totally wrong to me. I could not believe that a person whose whole life is conniving, diplomatic, backstabbing, stuff like this wouldn't have just been like, oh, this is obviously this dude. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes and no. I think it's justified in the sense that he completely loses his mind when this happens, and this affects him very tremendously. So he's not thinking clearly. At the same time, if I had a choice, I would also say I would like this to be a bit more separated in time and space. So it's not immediate, but it's like the next episode or something. It's the immediacy of it that makes it a little bit too simple.
Especially because if I'm to believe that the reason he didn't see through this ploy was because he is sort of enraged by this, it's so horrific to him, or so offensive to his sensibilities, and personally tragic for him, that he's not thinking it through. I would think that the first person he would attach onto is the most recent person he had a falling out with. I don't think he would go to Lord Rifa as the most logical person necessarily either. So even that doesn't necessarily land for me, even if I assume he's not thinking clearly, which I'm not even sure I buy. So to me, that was really tough to take. And in particular, because I felt like his character was so well established for the entire thing that it was a real slap for me. A real slap in the face for me was that decision.
Okay,
yeah.
I'm like I said, I am okay with it. I essentially just consider it a slip up on his end.
Okay.
And when he realizes he's not happy, his response at least is proportionate. He is very displeased when he realizes, because it is kind of a big deal. Like I said, I agree that it's a little too pat, it's a little too television-y, it's a little bit too, or it's almost a bit like, I don't know, an old play or something. It has that quality of compression to it, of in the real world this would happen half a year later, and here it happens immediately. And the thing is, I think my mindset is such, and I think that might be a lot of the differences that we have, that when the show shifts a little bit into that mode of being a little bit less like that, it doesn't bother me. And that it's perfectly fine for me. Sometimes I would say, like as with this one, I love Londo's reaction. I love everything that follows. I love how it's played. It's the act itself that is a little bit too obviously written. And I mean, I say this with all due respect to a season that I generally find amazing and incredibly well written. And I think all the performances are very beautiful. And it's not like I wouldn't believe that Rifa is a dick and would do something terrible. And I understand why Londo thinks that. As a writer, and again, really with all due respect, because I really don't want to be arrogant about this, I would have made it just slightly different. Just have a little bit more time pass or something like that. But it's not a flaw that bothers me, while at the same time I see what you mean. There's just there are things that bug me more about the show than this. I just react to different things than you do.
Well, one thing I should point out, and I think this is also an issue with the fact that obviously a show like Babylon 5 isn't written for me anyway. So in my world, right, what I would want is get rid of the Arthur episode and just take more time for this plotline, right? And one of the problems that I totally appreciate is that if you took the entire season of Babylon 5 to tell 3 hours of time on the space station, I would love it. And everyone else would think it was the worst thing ever. And so I do also fundamentally appreciate the fact that the amount of detail that I, for some reason, love to see is probably actually just read as boring. This may be because maybe my mother did too good of a job raising me, or maybe too bad of a job raising me. She really liked theater, and we used to go to plays all the time. And one of the things that you can definitely say about plays is, in contrast to modern things, they are incredibly boring on a plot scale, right? Like you will watch a 3-hour play where that is you can watch A Raisin in the Sun, which I think is like an absolutely phenomenal play. The entire thing is, at the end, someone decides not to sell a house. Like that's the entire 2 hours you just spent invested in this thing, is someone deciding not to. But to me, that's awesome because
Yeah,
it
yeah,
was
yeah,
explored in so
absolutely.
much detail or whatever. And I can understand how those maybe that gets boring now. And so I also can see I absolutely see the limitations of my complaints where it's like I want this to be this excruciatingly detailed series of like explorations of all this stuff, and at the end of the day, hey, this season they probably would have got canceled in season 1 if they'd really indulged it that much. But seasons 1 and 2 somehow were managing to pull that off in a weird way. They were managing to do that kind of thing. And so I think that's why I mention it now in
You
season
know,
3.
that's funny because the thing is that see, you had seasons one and
Yeah,
two, right? So it now also needs to build to something else.
I
So
guess.
I mean, some of it may also just be the effect of it changing in that way. But I do agree. Like, if I was doing it now, I'm pretty sure if
Yeah,
Joe Straczynski was doing it now, some of these episodes would be not there or would be
maybe. Yeah.
earlier on or something like that. I think that's partially also the struggle of making it at the time when it was made. On the other hand, I think a positive effect that you don't directly notice is that the fact that there is an episode like A Late Delivery from Avalon
Mm.
um, has the effect that when you reach the end of a season, you've watched a year and it feels like a year
Yeah.
on that
Enough stuff
station.
happens.
Stuff happens that has nothing to do with any of the other stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think the show would be as good necessarily if everything that happened on it was about the shadows and the Vorlons
Yeah.
and Earth and like the fact
Yes.
that random stuff happens that you've seen like Jakar get drunk and pass out.
Yeah.
Um, it just in a context that has nothing to do with his usual stuff, still informs your feeling about the show and the people on it. And so there is, even when the episodes aren't perfect, there is, I think, a positive contribution to the overall experience that you have with the show that nowadays some shows are missing a
Yeah.
little bit.
Well, like a density. I think you mentioned before, which I hadn't really considered until you mentioned it, but it's definitely true. The fact that shows high production value, high quality shows nowadays are usually 10 to 12 episodes per season, whereas something like Babylon 5 is like 22 episodes a season, does have a quantitative impact. The number of things that you feel like happened on the station simply couldn't be as large as it is if it was in a modern format, which I had failed to appreciate, but I think you're absolutely right about that. Like, modern shows just can't be as expansive in general because they are shorter, literally.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think that's part of the effect of especially very good shows, but shows that have lasted a long time. You get to the
Yeah.
end, and sometimes it can be very powerful because you just have this feeling a big chunk of my life kind of just ended. Like,
Yes.
I spent time
Yes.
here.
Yeah.
And on B5, that works, I think, particularly well. On other shows, it works by accident.
Yes.
Sometimes it works on purpose. But there's still this quality of, okay, I know something about the station. I know something about the weird things on the station as well. The weird kind of irrelevant quirks of the station. I know something
Yes.
about those as well, or some of the goofier shit that happened. Um, so that has a positive effect, I think,
Yeah. Yeah. No,
on the
I
overall
wouldn't
show.
disagree. Yeah. So,
Okay, well, let's go on.
but that was a fairly minor one because it's like, it's just me disagreeing because I didn't believe a character would do something. It's like, okay, but he did. And, you know, he could have. I mean, people make lots of weird decisions in life. It's not really all that weird that somebody would. So something that troubled me a lot more was Ambassador Kosh is killed after essentially Captain Sheridan asks him for a favor, in a sense, you could say. And because of the fact that Ambassador Kosh agrees to the favor, Ambassador Kosh is killed by the shadows. I literally, maybe, this is one that, like I said, I'm ordering these in terms of things that bothered me, so this is still fairly low on the scale, but the reason that this bothered me less than it would otherwise is because I'm willing to believe that in season 4 or 5, there's more explanation for why this happened. I literally have no idea why he was killed. I don't understand if he thought he was in danger, which it seemed like he did, why he didn't just leave. And furthermore, I don't understand if it was beneficial to kill him for some reason, why they didn't kill him a long time ago, because as far as you can tell from the scene where he's killed, they could have killed him at any time. There was literally no reason. They didn't have to do anything special to kill him. They literally just walk in and kill him. So I literally didn't understand this at all. This is a major character. His death made no sense to me. I didn't understand why he was killed. I didn't understand why he wasn't killed beforehand if he could have been killed. And I didn't understand why, if he thought that he was in danger, which we are told that that is why he perhaps was reticent to grant the favor, why he didn't just leave on his ship and that's the end of it. Like, I literally didn't understand this at all. I'll start there.
Okay, I mean, to me, this makes sense. So I just don't have that problem.
Okay.
I feel that I thought it was kind of spelled out enough, which is, especially by the time you get to the end of the season, which is that the Shadows and the Vorlons are not entirely directly they're nudging the younger races.
Yes.
They're not getting involved as in, we will take your fleet and blow our fleet and just, go ape shit on you.
Yes.
And Sheridan essentially forces Kosh to say, you need to do something. You need to act properly.
Yes.
And Kosh knows that that's basically breaking the rules by which the Shadows and the Vorlons play with each other.
Okay.
And there'll be a personal price for that. They will come and kill him. Yes, in theory, he could have tried to escape or something, but I think he stands by his principles. And also, I don't know, lots of people who have said something bad to the king or to the this or that, there are situations where sometimes people come after you and you lose. I don't think that that's a metaphor that I don't understand. And I mean, he says relatively explicitly that the reason that he didn't do it earlier was that he was afraid. He appears to Sheridan in the form of his father in a dream, in a scene that I actually find very memorable, because he says that he has lived for such a long time that he's gotten used to it. And I thought that was touching somehow, this idea that he's lived, God knows, 1,000,000 years. And he could keep living. But, he kind of, from his perspective, now has to take a further step. But of course, that step escalates everything even further. But I don't exactly see where the problem is, because I think, yes, of course, they could have attacked him before. They'd had a skirmish before early on at some point.
Yes.
But that was exactly kind of the situation between the two sides. It was more of a Cold War where they would, that is actually the metaphor for this that I think is the most appropriate, is the Cold War.
Yeah.
Is there are these two superpowers, and then there's these tiny, smaller countries that are trying to find their way, and both of the sides are kind of nudging them in the directions that they want, maybe assassinating someone here, doing something there, but you don't, drop a bomb on Russia and the other way around, or in the USSR. And I think that's what this is. And he knows that there will be a price, because he's not just breaking the rules of engagement, he's turning it into a proper open war. Which is also, I think, what then happens basically throughout the season. Like, it escalates to a very different level of war, where it's not just, and that continues into season 4, of course, where it kind of becomes proper open warfare with very big consequences for everyone, because these, ancient races are not kidding around.
Well, to explain further why I have a hard time with that, I can even use the same analogy. So in a Cold War, right, in general, if you are the ambassador to Moscow and you call in an airstrike on Moscow, you typically don't remain in Moscow or something, right? You would leave if you thought your life was in danger, right?
Would he abandon Sheridan and everyone?
He is by definition. If he
doesn't know that he's necessarily going to die. He may think that he's in danger, but he's not 100% certain that he's actually going to be killed as a result. Like, he may think he could maybe win that battle. He has won it before, or at least gotten away alive. So again, I don't think that it really breaks down. He's this very powerful being, and he decides he's going to, make a stand with consequences.
So what I guess what you're saying is he thinks that he is not actually in particularly grave danger. He thinks he's
No,
in
I
like
think he thinks
mild
he's in grave.
danger.
No, I think he thinks he's in grave danger. It's just not necessarily 100% certain that this will result in his death. It's a difficult choice. It's like these enemies are on the station. I'm on the station. I want to push things in a certain direction, but that will come at a certain price. And he decides to pay that price, and it does not go well for him. And he knew that that was a very likely chance, just like when you take some kind of political action that, people might kill you for. Now, he is very powerful, but so are they. So is the opposing side. And so, yeah, it reads normal to me.
And from your perspective, why did the shadow bother killing him would be the other question. So what the sum total of what happens after this is he is replaced by a different Vorlon ambassador, also named Kosh, because as far as we are told at this part of the season, all Vorlon are named Kosh, or at least all
Yeah.
Vorlon are referred to as Kosh.
Yeah, that may not be entirely true, I think.
Right, yeah, but so far we've only ever seen
yeah,
two Vorlons, I think,
two.
right?
Yeah.
So presumably this is known, and so I guess the reason that they would kill Ambassador Kosh is simply to send a message. I
Yeah.
guess, would that be a correct assessment?
Yeah,
Okay.
pretty much. It's like you pay a price in blood because you did this. And I mean, I think the life of a Vorlon is a particularly valuable thing because they're very ancient, and I don't know how many of them there actually are. That's
Right.
never said.
We
But
don't know at this point at all. We know there are
there could
two.
be lots of them. We know they have a very
Yeah.
large fleet, so there's clearly plenty of them somewhere. But still, they're very precious about anyone even leaving Vorlon space. Like, when was the last time a Vorlon died?
Right.
Probably
Yeah.
like millions of years ago.
Right.
So I think they're just basically sending a message. They're retaliating with the person who's there. They're not going to blow up the station. It still has many uses for them. The station is the thing that everyone is trying to pull in one direction or the other.
Okay, well I guess I like your explanation better than what I felt when watching the show. Like, if I try to step back and go, there's really no particular point to what's going on here. In the Cold War is a good analogy. Like, why did they try to assassinate Fidel Castro? It's like, well, honestly, no real reason. It's just when you are in a conflict of this type, people kind of just do stuff. They're like, we think we need to send this message to this person because we just kind of do, diplomatically at this point. And was it the greatest idea? No. But that's what happened. I maybe could get on board with that. That's much better than what I felt watching the show, to be honest, because at that point in time, you're not really thinking of it as a Cold War, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's definitely an analogy, I think, for this whole thing, and I think that becomes even clearer in season 4.
And sort of towards the end of this season, it becomes more clear as well, but not at the time.
The irony of it is actually that in this analogy, the Vorlons are the Soviet Union, and the Shadows are the United States.
Yes, that does seem more fitting. Yes. And the Vorlons are. We continue to find out through season 3 that the Vorlons are not really all that nice. You sort of get hints of it in seasons 1 and 2 that they may not really be the good guys in a full stop kind of way. And in season 3, you really is kind of cemented that it's like they're good from the perspective of Captain Sheridan because he maybe has a relationship with them that he doesn't have with the Shadows in a sense, but they're really not that good in the way that a human being thinks of someone as good. Like they're not really kind-hearted, benevolent people like a human being thinks of as a good person. That's not really what a Vorlon is, and we see that very clearly now.
Yeah, and Kosh, the original Kosh, is not necessarily representative of the Vorlons. So
right.
He is a bit more unusual. He has a fondness for the humans, for Sheridan personally.
Yeah.
He is, the Vorlons are themselves not entirely unified. They don't all have one ideology, because you see that the new Kosh is like, I'm still Kosh,
Yeah.
but he's not Kosh.
Right.
Like
Yeah. Yeah.
he is very, very different and represents a very different attitude. Like he is full on authoritarian, where Kosh had, he is full on order. He's like 100% order, where Kosh was a more complicated figure, and made different choices in many cases. Like he wasn't like just a good guy and the others are bad, but he is different in his own way, and that becomes very significant, I think, ultimately because because Kosh also makes certain choices, including that one.
Yeah.
And that leads into the end of the season, and then the end of the Shadow War ultimately in season 4. Okay, and then
we get to the I guess the final thing I want to mention, which is the thing that I really didn't like. So this one was not a mild dislike. This was like a severe dislike.
Okay.
And that is basically the end of the season.
Okay,
so,
which I adore, but
yeah, okay.
So we'll see. Yeah,
so it started, the part that really kind of, I was like, I have no idea what I was even meant to think about here. So it starts by Captain Sheridan's wife, we might say ex-wife, because she technically died, or he thought she died. I don't know how you refer to someone who was your wife and then died, and you don't think they're your wife anymore because they're dead. Yeah. But whatever you want to call that. Her name is Anna. She returns. And the way she returns is we see a Vorlon, not a Vorlon, a shadow capital ship, or whatever they are, launches like a little transport out of it. So she was like hanging around on some capital ship in hyperspace, gets in a transport, comes to the station. Now, we don't know this yet because we haven't seen it. This is in arrears. I know this is what happened because we see that ship come into Babylon 5. But obviously when you're watching it, you have no idea who's on the ship. You just see this transport. Now, the end of this episode is shot first person from her perspective. She goes on to Babylon 5 and she walks through the halls of Babylon 5 and people look at her.
You know what?
Strangely,
I know. Actually, I think what that is.
Okay.
If I remember correctly from one of the things I've read about the show.
Okay.
The script has that differently, and the director shot it that way.
Okay.
I really, if I remember correctly, the script has it as nobody really reacts. Like they're not going, "Oh, who is that?" But they're just kind of stepping aside.
Yeah.
And the director shot it in this way. I think I don't want to blame someone innocently, but I think that is what it was. And I agree. This bugs me. It's stupid as hell, because why are they reacting?
Yes.
Maybe one of them knows who the fuck Anna Sheridan is.
But basically no one.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if somebody did know, if someone did know who that was, they'd be like, "Oh my God, Anna, what are you doing here? Yes. I thought you were dead."
Agree,
right? Yeah. So
this is just a flat out mistake.
Yeah. So that was really weird, and especially at such an important moment to make such a big mistake felt really odd. Then we sort of continue the mistake because normally in the world of Babylon 5, the steps that would have to occur in order for someone to go from the entrance of Babylon 5 to the quarters of someone in Babylon 5 is first they have to scan a valid card at security. Second, they would have to locate where the quarters were, which most of the time involve asking someone fairly high ranking. Like, you wouldn't just know necessarily where the captain's quarters were. In fact, I don't even know if you can get into where the captain's quarters are without going through a checkpoint. The diplomatic wing definitely has guards posted on it, and if someone walked in there, you would be turned away. So right away, I'm like, none of this makes sense in the fiction of the station. But then we get to the most ridiculous part, which is that normally, if someone wants to enter a quarters, they have to push the little button, and the person inside has to say, "Come in." But that none of this happens. The person literally walks into a room in the middle of the night, and it's just fine.
No, okay. the entire sequence there. Okay,
Yeah.
none of this bothers me terribly. It
Really?
does bother me with the first
Okay.
person. The
Okay.
first person shit bothers
Yeah,
me.
yeah, yeah.
The other thing, this is a shortcut. This
Okay.
is a television language shortcut.
Okay.
I wouldn't write it that way.
Okay.
But then again, I'm not sure that the way that I would write it would be better,
Okay.
because then you're dealing with minutia in a way that is actually like, okay, I still need this confrontation. Okay, so she's gonna do this. She's gonna bribe someone. It's gonna be this. And then half the audience is gonna go, "Why the fuck are you explaining this? Just let her go through the fucking door." So I have the same impulse you do there.
Okay.
But I recognize that a lot of people don't. Um, that it kind of wants to cut to what the impact is of the event rather than what the process is that leads to it. But it is
Well,
television
okay, but I
in
might
that way.
counter that though. Two things. One, that's the job. Meaning, as a writer, your job is to create those scenes in a way that doesn't require you to get into minutia, but that also doesn't violate the rule. Like, those are the two things
Yeah.
you're required to do. And if you don't do one of them, I'm like, well, that was the job. But two, I would say I would actually come at it from a different perspective. This scene is not hard. I mean, literally, Sheridan could be walking down the hall when she comes out the thing, and that would just kind of solve the problem. It's a little bit coincidental, but it's not so weird. To me, it was a case of writer's greed. They wanted to have Delenn be in the same room at the same time when she comes in so she can drop the little ball and have it shatter on the floor. Like, they had this thing they wanted, and it felt like writer's greed to me, where they're just like, they just disrespected the like sort of the integrity of the world because they had all these things they wanted in one place and they weren't willing to do the extra work to make them actually get there naturally, and they just cheated. They just said, it just happens now. Everyone's in the right place at the right time, and a bunch of things aren't happening that normally happen so that we can have this. It felt really bad.
The impact on me is not as big as on you, but I do recognize that is a moment of television.
Yeah.
Like, most of the time B5 feels like something else.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then very rarely it falls back on kind of television methods to do something.
Yeah.
Like every other show is 99% that, and this show is like 1% that.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, those moments, depending on your disposition, can pull you out more or less. For me, since I'm kind of more focused on the emotional impact of it,
Yeah.
I'm all right with it. But it doesn't. I understand that if what you enjoy about the show is the way that it kind of builds that reality, when it takes those shortcuts, they can be irritating. I understand and respect it, while at the same time my reaction is more to just kind of notice a little bump and just continue enjoying the performances and the story and the writing, which I still all like, while at the same time I agree there's a couple of small bumps there, and I'm not too happy about that particular sequence as well. Like, I like the impact, I like everything that it means, but the way, honestly, I am far more bothered by the people all staring at her than I am by the thing with the door opening, because that to me is like, I can switch that off. I can say that's a shortcut.
Right.
I understand how things work.
Right.
I think it also when they show it in the next episode, it's slightly different. Like, it's slightly extended. It's not just boop, boop, smash ball, but something I think is slightly different. But I can't swear to that. But still, I can understand like that you use this kind of shortcut, because that's just a different language of storytelling.
Right.
But everyone stares at Anna Sheridan
is
just a flat out mistake. And one of the few, I would say, in the show where someone just made a really incomprehensible choice and then they kind of used it anyway. I had to live with it. But it is really, really strange, because you expect her to have, like, I don't know, horns growing out of her head or something.
Yes.
She looks so normal.
Yes.
that
She's
it's
not even
just
dressed oddly. She just looks kind of dressed like any random person in the station might be dressed.
yes. I agree. That's just a flat
Yeah.
out mistake. And if I remember correctly, I think the director kind of
Said oops.
didn't follow the script
Yeah.
there as closely as they should have.
So,
Um,
and for me, it's like these things compound. Like if it was just one, I'd be like, okay, but it's that one, and then the fact that no one could have really done that, and then it keeps going. So the episode.
that director never directed another episode of
Was he
Babble
fired?
I'm
Was he
just trying to say. Um,
Yeah.
that never happened again, apparently.
It's like, if you ever do that on my show, you will never work on this show again.
Yeah, they were pretty strict about following the script, not changing the dialogue, not
Yeah.
which not all shows are that. But yeah,
Yeah.
that person did not come back.
So I felt like this just kind of was a long string of things, because from there it continues. The character reactions now are all very abbreviated too, because, the first thing I would be like, how did you get past security? Like, I would be so suspicious if somebody magically walked into my quarters like that his reaction is so muted. I would be like, I would immediately call security. I would be like, take this person to the brig immediately. Like, I would have a gun trained on them the instant that happened, right?
Counter argument.
Okay.
What I like about this, so okay, I have a very hated plot thing, which is the sort of misunderstanding or obvious lie or something where a character is tricked to go against their friends because someone said blah blah. This is so common in so much stuff, especially anything influenced by Joss Whedon, who's very prone to this kind of storytelling.
Oh, yeah, right.
And it just makes me so mad. And I like Zahadum and Shadow Dancing because Sheridan is like, oh no, you are my true wife, but Delenn betrayed me, blah. And the entire time he's like, this is bullshit. I don't believe a word of this. He from the moment I think he sees Anna Sheridan, he's like, this is a trap. Can I play it against them? So that's why it doesn't bother me, because his entire reaction is completely fake. Like, even his outrage and everything, he's just playing them. He's just waiting for an opening to use this against them. So I like it because it seems to do the kind of plot that I really don't like. But then, in fact, Sheridan, I don't think there was a second where Sheridan didn't think that that her personality had been erased and she had been inside a shadow ship and she was like modern. Like, I don't think he fell for that for a millisecond.
Well, I don't either. But the problem is that, to me, is like, that's Londo Mollari. The fact that in a split second, upon seeing your supposedly dead wife again, you would immediately go, okay, this is a trap. I want to be able to turn it around on them. So what I should do is act like I might believe that now so that I can ingratiate myself and then do whatever they want me to do and then turn around on them. If Londo did that, sure. Captain Sheridan, I mean, he's a smart guy, but master manipulator who's that fast on his feet. I mean, that's some next level stuff right there.
I think that is very much Sheridan.
Okay.
He's had a couple of moments of that already in like season 2 during the whole union strike thing, and he's had these manipulative moments before, and he's gonna have plenty more of them in season 4. Like, that's definitely a dimension to his character that comes out more and more, that he is very capable of that and of thinking around problems. In fact, that I would say almost is like one of his prime things ultimately.
Like, I don't disagree. He can do that.
But he's been fighting a war for like several months at this point. Like, when Anna Sheridan walks in, like, if she walked in season 2, he'd be like, "Oh, Anna, you're back." He walks in here, he's like, "No, bitch." No way. Like, so I do think that, given we've also seen him already be quite worn out. Like, he's really in this now. He's had rough experiences. And he is becoming a much harder person than he ever was, and that is a very, very big part of his story, is becoming someone quite different. still a good person, but yeah, he is forced to be more of a politician than he ever was. Um, like even when we're introduced to him, he is already part of a kind of secret group that's trying to push things in a different direction. So there
Yes.
is
Yeah. Yeah.
he has an interest in conspiracies and stuff like that. He has this devious dimension to his character, and in fact, this is going to be something that's going to be more prominent in season 4, without spoiling anything, but just also in how people see him. Like, is he, is he manipulating people? Is he, it, because there is a dimension like that to his. The more he has to become a politician, the more there is that dimension to him. And I personally feel that this is intentional. That we realize that one of the things about Sheridan that's significant is that he's very quick on his feet, and that he thinks outside the box. Um, that's why he was a war hero. That's why he managed to destroy a Minbari ship, which nobody else had ever managed. That's there from the
Yeah.
beginning.
The cleverness,
And
definitely. I totally agree.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And here I think we're just starting to see him evolve into someone much more ruthless and much more. I mean, also he from like midway through the episode or something has a very violent solution in mind
Yes. Yes.
for what he's going to do, and he's
Yeah.
very ruthless about implementing it.
Yes.
Um, uh, so yeah, that's I think that's a dimension of his character and where he's going. So it doesn't seem like a contradiction to me. Sorry for the endless
No, well,
response,
it's good though, because that's the whole point, right? Like the whole point is for me to point out, like, okay, I didn't really like this part, but you did like this part. Let's talk about it, right? So it's good. I mean, if you don't go off on that tangent, then we don't even need to go over it, right? Like I want to hear what you thought about it. So
I mean, maybe you'll also see some of this differently once you've seen more.
I
wonder
might,
about that
because
it is this ruthlessness and intelligence of Sheridan is a major theme throughout. And personally, I just really like it because, okay, I also like what people sometimes call competence porn. I like people being good at stuff.
Me too. Yeah.
And Sheridan has that thing where he's almost like kind of Columbo or something, where people are like, "Oh, that goofball, he's easy to manipulate." Yeah. And it turns out he is a ruthless bastard and way smarter than he looks.
Yeah.
And I really like that, and I think that really comes to the front in Zahadum, because he is willing to go there.
Right.
Like he is willing to do some very, very dangerous things, essentially to kill himself. And he's willing to do it in an intelligent way. And he's like, he also manipulates Delenn essentially.
Yes.
To protect her.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, he is willing to go that far to make it work.
Yeah.
So that is, I think, an important thing about him that we're going to see more about. Sorry, I'm just going to go in circles there. Yeah. Okay. So let's go on.
So that part, again, like I would spot you that. Like I would say, like, okay, much like the Londo Mollari thing earlier, I was like, I didn't really buy that part of the character, but it's possible. It's possible that someone thought that fast on their feet. And, he is a clever person. So it's, if they took someone who was really stupid and they came up with that plan instantly, that would be ridiculous. But we know he's a smart person. He's demonstrated that amply. So, that's not that. So for the rest of this, the things I don't like are entirely on the shadow side. I felt like it was pretty implausible what happens next from their perspective, not really from his perspective. There is one thing that I didn't understand from his perspective, which is Hades doesn't know anything about Minbari technology. So it was I thought it was really implausible to think that as a non-expert in Minbari technology, in fact, so much so that originally he couldn't even have piloted that ship himself. He needed other Minbari to do it. So he's only kind of learned by watching. That somehow he can pilot it for precise remote, like, targeting to his Earth non-Minbari communicating device. It's like, okay, I mean, all right. But other than that, let's just say I ignore that for now. Like, let just say it works.
To me, that is something that happens off screen, so I'm kind
It's
of
like,
okay with
whatever,
it.
that happened somehow, and it did some stuff. So let's just talk about the shadow side of things. So we start off, and it's like, okay, I want you to come back to Zahadum with me, Anna says. Why can't you just tell me that here? Well, you've got to come off the station. So it's pretty clear right from the beginning that it's sort of a setup, and they really want him to come because they're trying to control this situation. They have a particular way they want it to play out, and I'm assuming that's pretty obvious to Sheridan, and like you said, he sees sort of transparently through it, which I would agree with, because they're not particularly good at it. Like, she is not a very good double agent in this case, to say the least. So that makes some sense. First off, though, why do they let him take his own ship? She came there in a transport. It doesn't really make any... It's almost like the writers forgot that transport exists. In fact, I think they did forget, because nobody ever mentions what happens to that ship. Is it still in the hold? Because she came there on a shadow ship, which would be a big deal. It docks, and it stays there, if I'm not mistaken.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. So that's a hugely...
I don't know if does she arrive on that thing, or does she then transfer to something else? That I don't remember, to be honest with you.
I think the ship just kind of comes in. I don't know exactly what happens.
Probably the same thing, yeah. But who knows? That might be just a fairly regular vessel they got somewhere. Like, I don't know if that's a shadow vessel. I think it looks more like some kind of Earth vessel.
It looked kind of almost like I don't know what exactly it was. But anyway, presumably, one of the things that she would have insisted upon is you come back in my ship, because I obviously don't want you bringing a bunch of weaponry into shadow space, if, in fact, that was ever a concern. In fact, we see later on that it is a concern, because she makes him disarm at one point. So they are both concerned and not concerned about people possibly bringing weapons. So that felt odd. But basically, they go there in the White Star, which, unbeknownst to her and the Shadows, he has loaded with 2 nuclear device warheads, basically, like things that can cause a very large explosion.
Yeah.
Now, again, for some reason, the Shadow people, I guess, not only have no defenses on their homeworld, because this ship, when it stops there, they are told they have to, you can't have any Vorlon technology that comes down, or even partial Vorlon technology, because it's not fully Vorlon. Partial Vorlon technology can't come into contact with our species or whatever, because they'll die or freak out, or they're superstitious about it, was almost what they said.
Yeah.
That ship later is allowed to literally fly directly into their capital city, and nothing even shoots at it. It's like their homeworld has no defenses at all. It's completely undefended. I mean, am I interpreting that wrong?
Well, I mean, I think the idea is that it is defended by ships, and they basically don't manage to react on time because he caught them off guard. I understand what you mean. I genuinely and fully understand what you mean. But again, it's something where, to me, it's kind of a part of the convention of storytelling, and I understand what the scene is a metaphor for. Like, this is kind of like, sometimes in video game writing, you do the same thing where you kind of convey something through something else. Like, the Talos principle is about an AI solving puzzles to create intelligence, ultimately, as part of a more complex than that. But I don't think that the intent is really that solving those puzzles is going to create an intelligent AI. It's about the idea of puzzle solving. And in the same way, sometimes I think you use shortcuts and language, and the idea of having engineered this kind of attack is something plausible, whereas the details are kind of skipped over a little bit, if you see what I mean. So again, that's the thing where it reaches into a slightly different form of storytelling, of not telling you how exactly, I did this and I disabled the defenses, or I got them past via this or that trick. But it doesn't bother me, because to me, that's essentially implied, if you see what I mean. Like, in this case, not in the, I'm walking down, everyone's staring at me scene.
Right.
That's just illogical. But in this scene, to me, the rest of it is kind of implied. I understand what this is, what this man is doing, what kind of political move or what kind of move this is. So I'm not necessarily bothered by the lack of explanation for everything. That said, if you'd had a couple of things to show some automated defense system shooting or something, would probably have been an improvement for you, because it would have kind of answered your objection a little bit if you acknowledge that a little bit. But at the same time, I don't care when I'm watching it as much, because I understand the idea of what it represents, and I find the image of the ship burning up as it falls out of the sky so powerful that I don't necessarily care about the details of exactly how did this work, because I can understand that it is something that to me in theory could have worked, and there are things there. It's not something that contradicts my understanding of the world, if you see what I mean.
I guess I don't really, because I think there are much more severe consequences than that would suggest. So, from the perspective of the viewer, up through the entire series, even the act of destroying a single shadow cruiser was a big deal. It took more than one ship, oftentimes, and a telepath, a lot of times, even to just destroy one ship, right? If literally one guy with a ship on autopilot can manage to nuclear bomb their homeworld, it's more than just we're eliding details. It has like severe consequences for your perception of the level of threat and sophistication that this race poses, and it makes it feel very incongruent with how they have been portrayed up to this point. It's so simple for him that it's just like, it's really disturbing to me, like in a deep level.
A really unpleasant, possible metaphor here. The American war machine is no less terrifying for the fact that 9/11 happened. A bunch of idiots rammed some planes into buildings and killed a bunch of people, including the Pentagon. Literally the seat of American power, of American military power, got blown up by a bunch of idiots. Like in the crudest, dumbest way possible, right? But at the same time, the American military is goddamn terrifying, killed like 1 million people in the last 20 years. And yet a bunch of fucking idiots still destroyed literally the equivalent of the Shadow City. Like, so, stuff like that does happen in history. Like, this kind of attack is something that's maybe not well. Like, I feel that the Vorlons, the Shadows, they would have for sure been able to defend themselves against, say, an attack fleet from Earth. Like, they would have been like, oh, we see them coming, we're going to respond. I think the point is more that they just didn't see it coming. Like, they did not expect this move. They did not expect the leader of the opposition to act in what is basically to them a sort of a selfless way, a sort of a way that is so antithetical to their own understanding of the universe, that I think it's more about a blind spot on their side. They just did not think he would kill himself and ram a ship into their world. It's more about the fact that they just did not see an individual acting in this particular way than about they have no defenses. Like, for sure, an entire fleet would have been, annihilated if it went there. But they allowed, and I think, I don't know if this is said somewhere else, or I don't know if there's a defense system that's like, I don't know, defends their entire space or something. They for sure have ships, right, that defend.
Well, yeah, they at least mention. I mean, they explain why the White Star is able to go in there, because I think they say, like, you'll be guaranteed safe passage. So we don't see it happen, but we assume that she like radios ahead or something and says, we're coming. So that's not surprising to me.
Equivalence. You do have moments where, like, in history, where like some leaders will meet, and the leader will go to the palace of the other leader and and be guaranteed passage. And
Yeah.
sometimes they'll be murdered.
Yeah.
And this is the equivalent of if that guy brought a knife and then stabbed
Yeah.
the leader of that place. So it's kind of about they as a gesture of goodwill allowed him to a vulnerable spot, thinking that he, at least from his perspective, would not act in this self-destructive way. And then it bit them in the ass. Like, to me, that's what thematically it's about. I realized that it would be improved if you showed any kind of defense system or talked about it. But
well,
to
or
me,
I would also interject that your description of it, or analogy to 9/11, if it had felt more like that, I would have been way more on board, because that plot was years in the making, involved subterfuge, it involved using the ships that would have been normal to see. Like, I mean, it was actually a very intricate plot that required many participants and a lot of planning. So even that, to me, if it had felt like that, I would have been like, okay, I could plausibly believe that. Because as you say, there are ways that, at least from a perspective of a terrorist, which is what he's acting like in this case, there have been terrorist attacks that have been very successful, many in history, in fact, at appearing to attack what would ordinarily be an unassailable foe from the perspective of the terrorists. This did not feel like that. It felt like kind of a whim, and it was concocted in 24 hours in his own head, right? And didn't involve almost any subterfuge at all. The ship that comes in is literally his own ship, and it just felt really, yeah. I mean, I can see why you're saying, like, okay, well, they're eliding some of that, but this is a very important thing, and eliding that much detail, I feel like here is hard to get past, at least for me.
Yeah, I fully understand what you mean, but I just don't have that reaction.
Fair enough.
Like I said, the meaning of it is implied for me.
Yeah.
And the rest to me is consistent thematically with everything going on in the series. Like, there's nothing here that's thematically out of place for me. Like, what bothers me in a lot of shows is when characters or organizations or whatever start acting in ways that are completely incoherent, or even inconsistent with what they have themselves claimed in previous episodes. And to me, the shadows are still the shadows, Sheridan is Sheridan, and the things that it's about don't change and are very, very strong to me. It's about Sheridan's willingness to sacrifice himself. It's about his ruthlessness in doing so. And it's about what the shadows represent and what they believe themselves to be, like, which I find very, very interesting, because they do have a belief system, and they don't see themselves as villains.
Right. Yeah.
They see themselves as doing something very necessary in the universe. And I really love the conversation that he has with Justin about this. I love how all of that is written. It's it's elegant. There's a little bit of humor to it, and it explains what this conflict is. And I think it's important for the resolution of this, that it's a conflict that you cannot just win. I think you have to understand what it's about, right? Because you can't militarily win against, like, even what Sheridan does is it buys time.
Right.
It's not a victory. The Shadow War isn't over. It just kind of pauses it, as I think the show itself says. It just gives a moment. It gives everyone a moment, and it puts the shadows back a little bit, but it's not the end for them.
And also, I think, as I was kind of mentioning, and I don't know because I haven't seen season 4 and 5, but like, I don't have a warm, fuzzy feeling for the Vorlons anyway. So even if somehow you eliminated the shadows entirely, I would almost imagine that there could be plenty of material just about the relationship of the races with the Vorlons from then on, because they are not, clearly benevolent people either. So there's a lot of unresolved stuff, even if the shadows were gone completely.
Yeah,
which
I
they're
mean,
not.
I uh, should I say a couple of things about ongoing stuff about the where it's going to head without trying to spoil anything.
You can. I
So
mean,
the
we
Shadow
can. We
War.
can put a. I can put a note down, and we can talk about it next time if you'd rather. I mean, I don't know.
No, no, I was
Okay.
just wondering like about your own perception. If
Oh,
I should
okay.
kind of
Sure.
mention what happens or not.
Okay.
I'm just wondering. For example, some people always put off the Shadow War is resolved relatively quickly in season 4. It then obviously continues into the consequence. Like
Right.
part of the okay. So what happened with season 4? Just to say that is that they were told the show they were over. They were
Right.
told they were cancelled.
Yeah.
They had planned a 5 season arc and they
Yeah.
got
I
4,
heard
and
that.
it
I
was
heard that. Yeah.
shit. They did a finale. They did everything, and then just at the end, they managed to basically negotiate a 5th season off of the fact that on a different network now, because the old one folded,
Oh, right. Yeah. Right.
that they did this spin-off. The network wanted to buy the spin-off basically, and then they managed to kind of bamboozle them into like, yeah, but do you really want to buy a spin-off to a show that's not complete? Buy
Was
season
there a
5 from us.
spinoff?
There was, and
Oh.
it was just called Crusade. It's utterly terrible.
Oh.
What happened with that thing is that, I mean, it's not about the same characters. It's just set in the same
Right.
world
Okay.
later. But the thing with Crusade is that when season 5 aired, that network realized, oh shit, all these people are just coming to us to watch Babylon 5 and then they're leaving again. They don't give a shit about our crappy programming. I think TNT was the network.
Okay.
And so they decided, oh, we don't want to do Crusade, but we can't just just cancel the thing now
Right.
because we have a contract and shit.
Yeah.
And so they interfered with it nonstop, deliberately to break it.
Okay.
So that it went, until it got so bad, this was like fuck you, and the whole thing kind of
Gotcha.
fell apart.
Okay.
But that had a very big impact on season 5.
Right.
Some plot elements that maybe would have gone to season 5 aren't in season
Right.
5. They lost an actor again, and then someone threw out all of Straczynski's notes
What?
in a hotel room. Yeah, he had digital notes, but he also had notes on paper that were like more detailed. And he was at a convention, and he had all the papers in his hotel, and someone threw them into the trash.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah. And basically all of these things happened in a very short space of time. And I think it left them really reeling, plus like budget concerns because the actors get paid more every year, but their budget kept getting
right.
smaller.
Yeah.
And it left them in a very bad place. And the beginning of season 5 wobbles. And basically what happens structurally is that a little bit of what would have been season 5, the beginning of season 5, gets pushed into season 4.
Right.
So a lot of stuff ends in season
Right.
4. The show almost, you could basically watch to the last episode of season 4, then watch the last episode of season 5, and you would have a complete show.
I see.
And then there's some filler material in season 5 that's weaker.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But I don't recommend anyone not watching season 5 because there's still great moments.
Okay.
And then the end of it builds to something that I think is very moving and beautiful. So it is ultimately worth it, but it does wobble there because of a lot of external factors messing with them. But I think to get back to this, what is set up here in Zahadum especially, I think, is that Sheridan has done something that changes the game.
Mm-hmm.
It does. It has a very big impact. But you still understand that the solution is in the conflict between the Vorlons and the Shadows. It's not something where you can just defeat them and it's over,
right.
Because both sides have these very strict ideologies that they're trying to enforce on you. And I mean, like I said, the Vorlons are, like you said too, if the Vorlons aren't that great, if the Shadows were just somehow all destroyed,
yeah,
what the Vorlons would impose on us wouldn't be that wonderful.
That's my assumption.
Yeah. So they have both kept each other at bay over the millennia, but at the same time they fight these goddamn wars and kill everyone all the time.
Yes.
So it has to be about resolving that, and it does go to a grander scale there. We'll see how you react to that.
So I have some questions about this that I don't think maybe you can tell me that they will be resolved, but I'm assuming they won't be resolved, and there were some things that I was like, I don't quite understand. So one thing that wasn't clear to me is when they say, like, there's a lot of stuff about, like, okay, the Shadows were defeated 1,000 years ago. This is sort of said a few times, like it's in the Book of Jaquan. if I'm getting that name correct.
Yeah.
It's in Minbari, like religious lore or whatever. And obviously the original captain is like part of that. Like he goes back in time with the time loop and the Babylon 4 subplot and all that stuff. I don't quite understand. So is the idea that the shadow creatures are still active, but their ships are just buried under planets for some... I really didn't quite understand. Like, their ships are buried inside planets. Like they unearth one on Mars. They unearth one on, like, a moon of Jupiter or something. I didn't quite get, like, why are their ships buried in places? Is that explained at some point? Or...
Well, I think it's just intended to be like an after effect of that war. Like they were kind of beaten back. It was a kind of military victory for the Minbari or the whoever was allied with them at the time.
Okay.
I mean, there was still Zahadum was still around. I think they kind of went into hibernation for a while. Is the idea?
Okay.
Because they always talk about the shadows being woken up.
Yeah.
So I think they're in hibernation. They come out. They mess up the galaxy for a while, cause some chaos, and then if they're defeated, they just basically go back into hibernation and come back 1,000 years later.
Yeah, so that part was kind of confusing to me. I don't know, like, the reason for that is, unless things don't really work in the Babylon 5 world the way they work here, which may be true, if I think about what would happen if a race went away for 1,000 years, when they came back, their ships would just be destroyed by, like, a pea shooter. Because, 1,000 years of technology is so much technology that you would just...
Well, no, but I mean, think about this. We're talking with the Vorlons and the Shadows are like millions of years old. To them, 1,000 years is like the blink of an eye. They just went for a nap.
But even so, I mean, if that were actually true, then you wouldn't really ever be able to blow up their ships. Like their ships are destroyable with current technology.
They are
it's just
destroyable,
a little weird,
but
right?
I think once in season 4 you see their full armies, you're like,
Yeah.
okay, there's no defeating that.
Okay.
Like they're not going all out when they
Right.
send a few ships here and there to blow something up. They're doing that on purpose.
I see.
They're playing by certain rules. Sorry, my cat just jumped up my leg. Yes, Bean, you're very cute. But I think you will, when you see more of that, you'll realize they were deliberately like holding back, and it kind of changes the type of war that this becomes. It from the kind of war that they fought back in the day. And I think the point is also partially with this previous story is that they were beaten back, but it doesn't matter. Like, I mean, obviously
Right.
what Sinclair accomplished, Valen accomplished was significant, but it's not a solution.
Right, yeah.
Like if they just defeat it now, they'll just come back in another 1,000 years. Like, and they'll feel essentially that they won, because what they want is to stir up conflict.
Right.
And it's not even they didn't even lose in any real sense.
Right.
So I think thematically what the point is, like, how do you end something like this? Because you can't just keep doing the same thing. You can't replay the same problem every 1,000 years. So yeah, they basically go into hibernation, come out of hibernation, stir up some shit, go back into hibernation. And I mean that there was a real conflict 1,000 years ago. Like the shadows aren't completely gods, but they're kind of like on the cusp, of being so advanced that to us they're magic.
Well, they seem to not exactly be, though, too, because, for example, in the episode where, and this was a little bit weird, I'm assuming that essentially what happened in this episode was that they only had the actor for like one episode, so Mr. Bester can't really be in a lot of episodes because he kind of is there and then he's gone. But I'm guessing that he can only be in a certain number of episodes, basically. There's an episode where he helps them to confiscate a ship filled with telepaths.
Frozen telepaths.
Yeah. And it at least seems like the shadows are having to respond technologically in a way. Like they're like, oh, like our ships get get ruined by these telepaths because they can prevent us from doing what we want to do. So we had to like start taking steps to like to stop that, right? In other words, it seems like they actually do need to respond to technology. It's not like it's frozen. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, okay. There is something there. I can't remember at what point it's explained.
Okay.
What's with the telepaths?
Okay, maybe season 4 or something will get
there
that.
is at least a point there about the telepaths and why suddenly telepaths appeared all over the place.
Yeah.
So there is kind of a connection there that I think makes sense. But I mean, overall, the big picture is that they are, 1,000 years is not much to them.
Yeah.
And I think that makes sense. Like 1,000 years is much to the Minbari in a way. Like they, the Minbari also they're a little bit decaying in some places. One feels, but it's a lot to us humans. But to them, their technology, sure, there are changes, and there's also, like I said, the overall conflict changes, becomes more intense than it had been before, partially thanks to Sheridan, but I do think that it's consistent with this very ancient race that, they make moves, but they're playing, a grand strategy game, and we're in something much smaller. They're playing on a scale that's not our scale, except until that moment comes along. I think that's also what Justin talks about these sort of nexuses in history, these turning points. And that's kind of what the show is about. The idea that there's larger historical forces, larger than humanity, larger than us as individuals, but then they are played out through individuals.
Yeah.
And then it matters who is in that spot. That's a very interesting part of that conversation that relates also to Comes the Inquisitor.
Exactly.
It matters that it's Sheridan who is there at that moment, because someone else leading these forces would not have acted the way that Sheridan acted. They might have just surrendered, or they might have just died, or something, without doing this kind of trick that he does. So I think that's to me the important part of the episode.
And it was a little difficult. So philosophically for me, I had a little bit of a hard time wrestling with it, but I didn't really count it against the series at all, because I don't know. I want to see seasons 4 and 5, because it's only just at the end that they kind of talk about it a little. So I may be like, okay, yes, that makes perfect sense. Or I might later be like, it didn't really make sense or something. But without the context, it's impossible for me to really have much of a go at it. But I did think it was a little tough for me to wrap my head around, because I was like, I wasn't quite sure I understood the explanation from the shadows about the shadows. Of course, it's also, I don't know if they're telling the truth, right? At this point, they could just be making stuff up, right? But let's suppose they're telling the truth, right? It was a little difficult to wrap my head around, because I didn't quite understand why, like, what was so bad from their perspective about what Sheridan was doing. Because to me, when I think about what their stated goals were, which is basically like, we want to, if I had to state it quickly, we want to try and breed better, like, galactic behavior or something. Like, I don't really know how to say it, but they were suggesting that they wanted conflict to produce better outcomes by having, better something survive the conflict, right?
It's social Darwinism, basically. It's this idea that through conflict between civilizations, the superior civilizations will rise to the top, and will also shed whatever, characteristics they have that aren't good. It's a sort of very ruthless, free market of civilizations, whereas the Vorlons want everything to be, controlled and ordered and top down.
And so to me, it was tough for me to get that, to wrap my head around it, because to me, at least in my conceptualization of something like social Darwinism, the ability to form and manage alliances is a crucial societal strength, and I wouldn't want to breed it out of a society, because that society will kind of always be weak if it can't do that. So it was a little weird to me, because I'm like, I guess I get what you're saying, but for an advanced race, I'm not quite sure I get it, but I guess they're, if I'm trying to think in their terms, they're like, we want each individual race to remain kind of separate, so we don't ever want to breed inter-race collusion just
because I mean,
cause, right? Or
because then the whole thing goes away, right? If all the races enter like into bigger pacts between each other, and then they don't fight each other anymore, then the entire system of breeding improvements goes away. Like they need conflict between the various races, or this isn't going to work. And the problem with Sheridan and the Vorlons, of course, is that, and Sheridan very much is an alliance builder. That's very much kind of his part of his strategy.
Yeah.
And once you have alliances, well, all those people aren't fighting each other anymore. It's like if you create, I don't know, unions or things, then people aren't competing with each other anymore. If you unify things, then this kind of, let's say, free market, or social Darwinism or whatever, this element of growth through conflict goes away. So they don't want him to do what he's doing, because it was going so well with the Centauri and everyone being at each other's throats. And in their view, this would eventually produce, a better, a stronger race. Maybe the Centauri, maybe the Narn. If the Narn won, if they somehow defeated the Centauri, that would also be a good outcome in the long run for them. But especially the Centauri, because the Centauri are, very aggressive, and they want to expand and they want to conquer everyone. And that ambition is to them a very positive characteristic, not just because they can exploit it, that is significant, but also because they believe that this is how galactic civilization is going to grow. And I mean, there are belief systems on Earth that are fairly equivalent to that. Not exactly the same, but still the idea that, there's even people who have argued that wars are good, because they make us stronger and they develop better technologies, and the weak die and the strong rise to the top. But if you start having, organizations that resolve those conflicts before nations can go to war with each other, then that whole belief system that doesn't exist anymore. And I do think that what the Shadows are saying there are people who've basically argued, especially I think in like the 19th century, exactly what the Shadows are arguing. So I don't think it's that alien, really. It does have very strong equivalents on Earth.
Yeah, and I guess there's no reason why an advanced species has to necessarily have an advanced philosophy either, I guess one might say, especially if where they originally come from is that they're very insular. This is the kind of thing that an insular society would potentially think, right?
Yes,
right?
I mean, I think there's something that I don't think is a spoiler to say, something you realize fairly quickly, which is that these species have kind of, they've gotten very stuck in their ways over their very, very long existences.
Yeah.
They've been around a very long time. They've become very dogmatic. I think you see that very much with Kosh. You see it with the old Kosh saying, I've gotten used to how things were. And you see it with the new Kosh who will accept no change from what was going on before. It has to be the way that he knows things and nothing else. And I just tell you what to do. Very paternalistic. And in a way, you also see it with the Shadows, who have this thing and they've been doing it forever. And it is kind of decayed and gotten very ugly in the process. It's also noticeable they don't really manage to convince anyone anymore. They just kind of brainwash them.
And they also seem like I'm actually okay with this fact. It doesn't actually bother me at all, but it because it seems plausible. They also seem to not be very good at affecting their own ends anymore, because it's like, well, in a sense, one of the reasons these races are colluding against you is because you have threatened them too much. If you had not presented such a formidable destructive force so quickly, then they probably wouldn't have felt the need to band together against you the way that they did. If you hadn't have shown such dominant military might as the Shadows showed, then people maybe wouldn't have been convinced at all by Sheridan's arguments, right? So in a way, the Shadows sort of are their own worst enemy, because by being a little bit too good at their job of going and destroying things, they create a natural reason for races to collude that would not have been there otherwise, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that's crucial. And both the Shadows and the Vorlons, there's what they want to accomplish, and then there's what they are accomplishing.
Yes.
And there's a very big gap between that. And that is something that has been set up as well about the Vorlons since the beginning, that there's something off here.
Yes.
And they've been doing this for such a long time. And at some point, you have to start questioning, is this even okay at all? Like, what are you doing? You're constantly making everyone go to war against each other. And also, as we see here, it kind of ping pongs between them. They have these, I don't know, ancient resentments against each other.
Yes.
They're completely unwilling to tolerate each other to the point of superstition. And it just, it's kind of hypocritical on some level. And
well, there was an element of that in season 3 as well. It was kind of, I was lukewarm on this interaction because, again, it felt way too abbreviated for me. But in the grand scheme of things, I liked the implication. And that was, there is an episode where they go to make contact with another ancient race. And the way that the feeling you leave that encounter with is that, like, that race of people think that the Vorlons are a bunch of dicks. And I liked that, like, wider I thought that it was too facile. Like, the actual incident itself didn't really, I thought it should have been more or different. I didn't really love that. But the fact that, like, yeah, there's other ancient races, and honestly, they don't think much of the Vorlons, to be completely honest. They have their own, like, petty grievances and stuff. That, to me, felt good. I liked that broader aspect of the world. It's really the only glimpse we've sort of seen of what those other races think. We know they are there because, like, Jakar actually describes himself as an ant in that one scene. So we know there's, like, that other race on that colony they were the planet they were surveying or whatever. But so that Sigma reminds me.
957 or something.
That reminds me of that.
Yeah, and that is very much, that is very relevant. I mean, that is what the beginning of season. I mean, what the end of the Shadow War is it ties very much to this bigger picture. You may find it too abbreviated, but I think at least the ideas you will enjoy. It is interesting in that it is about something, like we were saying, it's about that in a layered way, where it's not just, you can't say the Shadows are just bad guys and the Vorlons are just good guys. They're entities that are acting based on these very sclerotic ideologies. And even we don't see any dissenters with the Shadows, but that's kind of because there's not much space for that to happen.
Right.
But we see that standard Kosh, original Kosh, is, if not a dissenter, but he is someone who's a little bit outside the norms of his society.
It does seem, because replacement Kosh already seems like a much more hardline kind of a person. We haven't seen much. He gets only a little bit of actual time in season 3 because it's fairly late that he gets replaced. But yeah, he does seem like, okay, original Kosh was a much nicer guy, which is kind of weird because he wasn't a nice guy. But, like, we find out that, like, oh no, like the actual like replacement is way worse than the original.
It's much worse than that. So I mean, you may find with some of this stuff that it will have that, some of these qualities that irritate you, but at the same time, these themes are presented, I think, in an interesting way that I hope you'll still enjoy. Also, I have to, since we're talking about stuff that we really like, Jakar's speech at the end of Zahadum, to me, is an unbelievable masterpiece of writing. Just the speech that you hear basically just before the end credits, about moments of transition, moments of revelation. The future is always born in pain. These things. It is such a beautifully written speech, and it is so beautifully performed. I know it was one of Andreas Katsoulis' favorite things that he did on the show.
Okay. You're talking about the voiceover, basically, that
the
they
voiceover,
played to kind of close the series.
Yeah. But I think that is such a perfect bit of writing. I almost remember it by heart, but I'm
Wow.
not going to
Okay.
try to recite it
Okay.
because it impresses me so much, just in the simplicity and also poetry of it. And the performance of it is so extraordinary to me because it's both uplifting and sad at the same
Yeah.
time. And just the little quiver in his voice when he says that the future is born in pain
Yes.
is so chilling to me. It's so because ultimately this is a show about history and about time and
Yes.
how big things change the universe and how we as individuals go through that. And it has this melancholic quality where it's hopeful, but of course always things pass, people die, things change, and that speech to me is really the episode. Like everything is the two things for me, and I mean maybe that speaks to what I care about more is that image of the ship falling out of the sky, burning up, and then that speech at the end. Those two things to me are what stays in my
Gotcha.
mind from this
Gotcha.
episode. These moments with the music and the voices and the images that just really really affect me. And that's to me the value of it, and how we get there is not unimportant, but it's not the most significant thing so long as I understand kind of what it means symbolically, or what is sort of implied to have happened off screen, or what kind of happens in the plot mechanics. Um, and that's something that a lot of shows don't manage for me, because other shows, they try to have these big moments, but they're jarring because they're thematically out of place, or then in the next moment the character does something that's completely contradictory. Oh, I have a 10-minute speech about the value of life, and then I just commit genocide or something.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
stuff like
Yeah.
that really happens on
Yes.
shows, like,
No,
and it's
absolutely.
not
Yeah.
meant to be ironic. It's just nobody cares about what the show is about,
Yes.
except in that individual moment. They're like, oh, I'm writing a nice speech. Oh, I'm doing the scene where this is happening. But there's no thematic cohesion. And the way that, to me, all of this comes together with Franklin on Walkabout, and the station fighting, to kind of
Yes.
defend itself, and all of these things. That's just what really moves me.
And even, I mean, yeah, even I will totally admit that the even in season 3, which was, season 1 and 2 were almost perfect for me. Season 3 I had a much rougher time with. But still, if I had to actually say, well, okay, you get to watch a season of a sci-fi show again, and it can be season 3 of Babylon 5 or any other season of any other sci-fi show, I'm probably honestly still going to pick Babylon 5 season 3. So I'm harsh about it here because it's sort of like your gifted child, but they've done something wrong and you're disciplining them. It's like okay, but they're still amazing at it. I totally accept the fact that it's still doing a lot of things right, even when I'm thinking it's doing some things wrong that I don't feel like they did wrong in other seasons. I still appreciate how much good stuff they got in there, as we talked about before. There's a ton of things I can point to where I'm like, that was great. The Franklin part in particular, I think we both talked about that, but that part was definitely something that is, it's something like I will remember, right? It's like a lot of shows you watch the whole show and there's nothing you will remember, right?
Yeah, I think that just speaks to the seriousness of the intent.
Yes.
That's, I guess often I mean, I've watched shows that I found that, well, I don't know, very low budget, or even movies, but
Yeah.
um, things that they have limitations because of how they were made.
Yeah.
But if there's a seriousness to the intent behind them,
Yeah.
that counts for so much. I mean, obviously it can be done badly, but when it's, they're coming up against certain limitations. The other year, I guess, I watched what's it called, the Omega Factor. It's an old British television show, got cancelled after one season.
Mm.
Kind of a supernatural conspiracy thing. It's flawed as hell, right? Like there's
Okay.
some, it's this stuff where they would shoot some things on video and then others on film.
Okay. Okay. Sure. Yeah.
There's like a million, all these production problems. It's cheap as hell, but there's kind of a seriousness to the intent of it And that's what I respond to. It's when somebody set out to make something and they took it seriously and they wanted it to really be powerful and meaningful. And it wasn't just like, yeah, I'm gonna do an episode of a sci-fi thing,
Yeah, yeah.
and there's this throwaway quality to so much that gets done in science fiction
Yes.
television, where nobody cares. Like they're not even trying. Like sometimes Babylon 5 fails for sure, but it's always trying,
Yes.
and most of the time it's succeeding.
Yeah.
And then sometimes something goes wrong, either for external reasons or because just you made a mistake somewhere. Um, but it never feels like it's cheap. Like even with some of these things that you're mentioning that are very television-y, that are very this or that, what it's trying to talk about, what it's trying to explore is never cheap. It's never making a banal kind of point that you're like,
Right.
really,
Right.
you know, great, yes. uh Stabbing people is bad. I'm very impressed.
Right. Yeah.
Or whatever, which shows nowadays tend to very badly to just very make very banal points about stuff in very crude ways where you're like, you want me to applaud that? Like,
They actually, a lot of those, what you're talking about, at least I think I know what you're talking about, because I definitely perceive that. And to me, it feels a lot like back in the, late 80s, maybe, there was kind of this thing that was common in television where you would have something called a very special episode. And this was basically like, it was for some reason you'd take some sitcom or whatever and you would basically turn it into like a bad after school special mandated programming feature that was like drugs are bad. Right? Like that's
yeah,
like normally
yeah.
the goal of this sitcom is to make you laugh, but on this episode we're just trying to show the horrors of drugs, even though like probably the writers are actively on drugs, they're or whatever.
Almost certainly, yeah.
Some of the writers are probably on cocaine right now, but they're gonna have an episode of why pot is bad for children or something like this. And one of the really tragic things these days is entire high budget shows are now like a very special episode level like stuff, right? So
Yes,
it's
and
bad.
they seem to assume that just saying
Yes.
this bad is somehow so morally worthy and
Yes.
so rare
Yeah.
that it replaces having to do good storytelling. and
Yes.
and they seem to have contempt for themselves, for the audience, because it's really infantilizing.
Yes.
And
Very much
and
so.
and at the same, it's not like they take some complex, they do some complex examination of these topics or anything. It's just, oh yeah, we said that hitting people over the head is bad.
Yeah.
That's we're good. We didn't write any
Yeah.
decent dialogue, or we didn't care about anything else, but just like the moral value of having said this sort of outweighs everything else. And that's, I don't know, that just it seems, yeah, it seems contemptuous of the audience and even of the material. Like you can do stories about all of this stuff, but you do stories that have layers and complexities to them, and they can still have a perspective. They can still have a sense of where you're coming from morally. Certainly Babylon 5 does, but it allows for space within all of that. It allows for different perspectives without necessarily condemning this character having a slightly different view. Like Garibaldi believes something else about religion than Jakar does.
Yes.
And there's space for both of them to have their opinions and not be evil people for it. There's also people who have terrible opinions who are just racist, and yeah, they're the bad guys. But it just allows a kind of a variety of perspectives to exist and to kind of come up against each other, interact with each other. And it's out of that a lot of the interesting stuff is born. It's when we see characters who have radically different beliefs come together or argue, or even just seeing them in parallel, seeing Jakar's idea of religion as it develops and seeing Delenn's idea of religion as it develops is an interesting contrast. And then Molari, who just doesn't seem to believe, like,
Yeah.
except maybe symbolically
Yes.
in all of these things.
Well, I might say on the last episode we got slightly political. If in this episode we were to get slightly theocratic, I might point out that it feels like the trend nowadays is that media has become increasingly religious compared to when I was a child, just not the kind of way that you would normally expect. So if, like, for example, what you just said, when you say, like, we're trying to say hitting people over the head is bad or drugs are bad, those are religious kinds of statements. What they are is attempting to remove the subtlety and ambiguity from a real human situation and just boil it down to a rule of thumb you can use. Like, don't do drugs because they tend to ruin people's lives. So the religious version of that is just to say that because the goal of the religion is to quickly propagate rules of thumb. Like, that's what we're doing here, right? Rules of thumb for something. And, in the best case, they're rules of thumb that actually help you. In the worst case, they may be rules of thumb that are actually quite bad for you. But either way, the concept is we've boiled them down, right? Whereas ideally, people who who work on creative endeavors, such as you and I, no matter what kind of foot you have in that particular pond, at least from our generation, it tends to be that art or creative endeavors were supposed to be more about trying to engage with things in a less judgmental and simplified way. Like, the point of watching art that is about drugs is to more directly convey the human experience in a way that doesn't boil it down to only just a simple conclusion. But as we sort of seem to be moving more towards this place where, like, our media and, like, our creative works are substituting for religious works, it's very unsatisfying to those of us who want the older conceptualization of what art was supposed to do, because mostly what we're getting is the new conceptualization, which is religious. It's God touching Adam on the Sistine Chapel, which you can even do well, but it's a little unsatisfying, so.
I think what it comes down to is that in a lot of this kind of religious propaganda, let's say, there are sinners and good people.
Yes.
And the sinners will either repent or they will be destroyed. And in some cases, depending on the flavor, they will only be destroyed, i.e. there is no salvation. And if I'm going to get political, the worst thing about our modern version of religion is that it has no forgiveness. People are canceled, people are this, people are that. And it comes, just to be clear, it comes from all fucking sides. Everyone has a version of this person is now evil forever, bad forever, because of something they said, something they did, some whatever thing. And there's no potential for people getting better allowed anymore. And that's, I think, what's terrifying. And in art, what it does is that, you have, like, either I'm a drug dealer. Or you have, so I'm so sorry, Mom, I did drugs, but I'll never do drugs again. And there's no, like, in the real world, there's like 15 different angles at every single thing. And you may have a perspective that maybe overall drugs are more destructive. Overall, they're fine. But you still have to acknowledge that there's just such a variety of human experiences. There's a variety of reasons people do drugs. There's a variety of outcomes. People even do some fairly hard drugs for a very long time without any effect because they're rich enough or they're controlled enough. Other people destroy themselves with freely available stuff like alcohol. Like, there's so many different outcomes, and you kind of have to acknowledge it. And the same is true of every damn thing. Like, and that's the difficulty of being a grown-up human being, is that on every single issue there's 900 different perspectives, and they're not all opposed to each other. They're all kind of at weird angles to each other, and you don't really know how to easily resolve that. And there isn't a simple answer. That doesn't mean there are no answers, but they're not simple. And or somehow, even if there's a simple answer, making it work is not going to be simple. Like, I know that the answer to global warming is nuclear power. That's simple. Overcoming the political and economic obstacles to it is fucking complicated. It's incredibly complicated, and I'm not just going to pretend that just because I have the answer, I'm going to be able to convince everyone in a day. And the same is true of every other thing. That that's in fact what is so difficult. Like many of us even want to accomplish the same goals, but come at it from different perspectives. None of us have proven that it works because the problem's still there.
Right.
Like you and I, we had like a 3-hour conversation about economics, and
Yeah.
we basically agree on almost every single thing.
Yes.
And yet the angles are just slightly different where they're not entirely compatible. And neither of us is like really certain of it. And that's kind of what it means to be a grown up. It's kind of realizing, oh shit, this is unbelievably complicated. And even though I have very clear ideas on like the direction that things should go in, and even some, but I still don't really have a simple way of making it all happen, because otherwise I fucking would have. And that's kind of what, and I need, sorry, I'm going on forever, but I need to also recognize that other people aren't necessarily my enemy for having slightly different or even very different ideas. Sometimes I'm more opposed to people whose ideas are very similar to mine, or seem on the surface very similar to mine, than to someone who on the surface is very different from me, but actually has very similar goals and just different ways of going about it. So all of this is enormously complicated. Now, art can't reflect all of that, but it can reflect that experience of being in a world where this person makes this argument for that religion, this person makes that argument for that political ideology. None of them are necessarily evil. And you have to kind of navigate a way through life. And there's just, it's not this person bad, this person good. And good art, I think, reflects that. It reflects that inside every person there's a lot of different aspects, and then in society as a whole there's a tremendous amount of different perspectives, and you have to put that into your work. Otherwise, what's the point?
And I mean, to that end, right? Like, I would love to watch something where you actually had, okay, there's a character that's very sure that nuclear power is the solution to global warming, and then there's another character who's like, home was had to flee because Fukushima destroyed their ancestral land, right? And that's something I want to see, right? I want to see those two characters talk to each other or have a relationship and come to an understanding of why each person thinks what they do, or something like this, right? That's what art used to be for me. Like, that's what I would have expected. But now it would only be the people who think nuclear power is horrible, don't ever do it, and people who think that nuclear power is the future, and anyone who doesn't agree with it is terrible. And again, it's not art. That's never art, right? Like,
and in art, I should notice that nobody's home got destroyed by Fukushima, because it was
left.
Basically nothing happened.
Well, they left.
But people were forced to leave. Yeah, people were forced to leave. That was fucking terrible. People died because of that.
Yeah.
People's like animals were killed and stuff when there was no danger. It's a very, very horrible story, but people get it wrong. Anyway, but that's not my point. My point is that you're right, and it not only would a piece of art now only have the extremes, it would only have one person be like absolutely right and one person be absolutely wrong.
Yeah.
Like, that's also the tendency. You can't even show opposites in a complex way. It's just a sinner and a good person.
Well, it's not necessary is more the point, meaning the interesting part of art is not who is right. The interesting part of art is the interaction between those things, to me. I'm going to have my own opinion that is informed by actually me researching things. So I don't actually need the art to tell me facts about something. What I need the art to do is portray something about the humanity, like something about how these people are acting and behaving and how they interact with each other, that helps me like contextualize, rationalize, or even just enjoy the fact that people have these discussions or arguments or differing opinions. And like, the shift over to something where the goal is to try to convince me of something just doesn't really work for me.
There's something interesting things in art happen in the contact between either the characters and other characters or the characters and their environment.
Yeah.
But it comes um, out of that relationship rather than and like people either trying to accomplish something in a world that is complex and difficult or is opposing them, or there's interactions between characters, but it needs a dialectical relationship between the two, and out of that comes the interesting thing. Just like in a way, the interesting thing of art, the interesting experience comes out of the work and you and the
Yeah.
interaction between you
Yeah.
and the work. In the same way, internally to art, it is basically in that relationship that interesting things happen. And I feel like a lot of art now is kind of, well, masturbatory. It's like
Yeah.
they exist in a universe in which the rules of the universe are designed
Yes.
to the characters and the universe they inhabit aren't separate.
Yeah.
They're just all one blob of sameness
Yeah.
that all comes from the same place. Like, I think when you create art, when you tell stories, you have to try, at least, I mean, depending on the story, but in many cases to think through the side of the villain or the
Yes.
person that you're opposing. I mean, sometimes they can be cartoon villains, because like if you look at some of our current governments in the last 20 years, there are people who are genuinely cartoon villains. They're just like, I couldn't put them into a story because people wouldn't believe it.
Right. Yeah.
That exists, and you can tell a story about that as well if you put the complexity elsewhere. But you still need to kind of try to understand the other things that happen in the world that are outside yourself, the other characters, why they are who they are. And it can't just be like, oh, it's just toxic masculinity, or it's
Yeah.
just evil, or it's
Yeah.
just he's not a Christian, therefore he's bad,
Yeah.
or oh, he's a Democrat, he must be evil.
Yeah.
Whatever the fucking form of it is, it's this simplification where all the other people are just spawned by your own belief system. And when you're an artist, what you should do is, I guess, you should try to import pieces of other people's belief systems as almost independent of you. It's like, I'm going to try and do justice to a guy who's, say, I don't know, something I don't believe. He's a libertarian. And
Yeah.
I mean, not in the social sense, what I would agree, but in the economic sense.
Right.
But I'm going to try and do justice to why that guy is doing what he's doing. And I'm not just going to do a caricature, but I'm going to try to really kind of create that character as separate from myself, separate from my art, inside of my art. And but you see the same thing happening if you watch some Christian movies.
Yes.
Where there'll be like an atheist and he's like, ha ha ha,
Yeah.
I hate God.
Yeah.
I pee on graves.
Yeah.
It's kind of Kevin Sorbo, God's not dead sort of thing, where you're like, this is ridiculous. This and now that which we used to get in Christian movies, we get in every fucking movie.
Yes.
Except with a different flavor.
Well, that's why I think I used the term increasing like religious nature of art, because it seems like to a large extent things which I would have thought of as being related more closely to an overtly religious piece of art now generally show up just in art broadly. It is no longer confined to people who are overtly stating that they are making a Christian movie that then has Christian themes. It's like we now have a set of de facto religions and religious artworks that are just not called as such, right? It's not
great.
Yes,
and these things have nothing to do also with what I would consider in a way genuine religious
right,
art.
Yes. They're not like a proper religion in the traditional sense at all.
Yes, that too, but also, I mean, even what we call like Christian art nowadays, Christian music and a lot of it in the film, is it doesn't have the quality of something of a truly devout, interesting poet or writer who is in a way always struggling with God, and like, why is the world as it is? I have faith, but like there are beautiful Christian writers, have been across the last 2,000 years, who have written powerful things, but they're engaging again. They don't assume that everything around them is exactly as they want it to be.
Right.
They're struggling with the external fact of, how do I reconcile my beliefs with this cruel world that I live in, and all of that. So that's very interesting and beautiful. So it's not that you can't create art from a religious perspective, but this kind of propagandistic, dogmatic art. Um, yeah, even if you agree with all of it, it's just dull.
Yeah, at
Uh,
the very least, it's not memorable. You watch something and it just kind of goes away. It's like, well, it was there and it was gone and nothing sticks with you.
yeah, because it doesn't work as art. So
Hmm.
a story I've told before to someone, I think, is I once met someone, thankfully not someone I hang around with much and at all, but who basically agreed with me politically on every single matter. Like we were like almost 100% identical. But that person was so awful. I could not stand that person because they had no sense of humor. They just none, zero, none, not even any ability. And a sense of humor in a way is a way of also reflecting on our own beliefs, making. I can make plenty of jokes about like socialism,
Yeah.
communism, atheism, whatever the hell, humanism. I can joke about the stuff in lots of ways, and this person just couldn't. And it's this again, it's this kind of blob like thing where you're just this one thing. You have no self-reflection, you have no self-irony, no nothing. And that really hit me. Like when I spent like a day basically with that person, and afterwards I was like trembling. I was like, what the fuck? And that has really stayed with me as a thought that you need something. Like it's not just having the right beliefs, and you need more, and you need an ability to reflect and interact with the world and yourself even. Otherwise it's awful and dogmatic, and it has that priest like in the bad sense, kind of that yeah, dogmatic and quality that's just
Sort of a
ugh.
false reverence almost.
Yeah, and it is, to bring it back. It's kind of like Kosh too. It's this very authoritarian.
Yeah.
I know what's good for the world. In a way, it's what's a little bit also explored in the Lord of the Rings, which some people see parallels to B5, obviously, which is this idea that Gandalf would be a worse dictator than Sauron, basically, if you
Oh,
gave him all the power in the
okay.
world.
Okay.
It's that just because someone has good ideas doesn't mean that they need to have all the authority in the world, and yeah, kind of even a well-intentioned kind of authoritarianism can be very, very, very terrible.
Well, and in keeping with your earlier point, Kosh, either Kosh, does not seem to have a sense of humor.
No, not very much. Maybe Kosh won a
A
couple of
little
times.
bit,
I don't know.
but
He likes to confuse people a little bit, it
yeah,
seems. But Koshu definitely has very,
yeah.
very little, and that does seem to be quite a problem with both of those civilizations. They're very convinced of everything they know, and they're gonna impose it on you, whether you like it or not.
Well, I think we have gone through all of season 3. Uh, Thanks very much for going over that, by the way, because especially on a season where I was lukewarm on it, uh, it it's much more interesting to me actually to hear your thoughts on it when of the parts I didn't like, because it gives me
Mm-hmm.
some new perspective on it. Whereas when we both like something, it's fun to talk about, but you
Yeah, yeah,
don't get
yeah.
as much if you both, because probably you both saw similar things in the thing you liked. Whereas this was interesting. I liked some of your descriptions too. I feel like they helped me kind of put it in more perspective of like, okay, I get why he liked this part, or I get why that part didn't bother him. It's because sometimes you can say that a part doesn't bother you, but people have trouble explaining why, or vice versa. So it was. I appreciate that you took the time to explain it, because it was elucidating. Like I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess I could see that. Like I could see that conceptualization of it for sure. Um, so I'm assuming I will go watch season 4 now, and then that'll probably be one of the because that'll be an interesting one to talk about, because it sounds like they cram kind of everything into season 4 through no fault of their own, because they kind of had to.
Yes, I mean, I have to say that the original intent of the show, right, was to have kind of an epilogue. So it wasn't supposed to be like balls to the walls action
Yeah,
until the last episode.
yeah,
It fades out, like as a lot of stories good stories do.
Yeah.
Like there's it's said somewhere, it's about what leads up to the war, and then what comes after the war.
Yeah.
So the changes that were forced on them, they only move the season by a few episodes, but I still feel that especially on season 5 the effect is fairly dramatic. And then there's a couple of other things that we can talk about that so season 4, you may find the beginning a little compressed. It works for me because I don't think I want to see another 20 episodes of Shadow War,
right?
Because
yeah,
it's just like they're just going to lose. I mean, sort of it goes more into the causes and things, but there is a compression that happens, and there is a wobble after that, unfortunately. And there's certainly some things that will probably irritate you. Although who knows, maybe the stuff that irritates a lot of people you'll like. I mean,
we already established the fact. So this is a totally irrelevant point. But I'll just point out because so you said that a lot of people don't like the episode with the monster and the revolver. Right, I wish I don't remember the name of it, but yeah. Oh, Gray 17 is missing, something like that, or
that's the name of the episode. Yeah.
Gray 17 is actually like the only thing I didn't like about that episode was I thought it was a tremendous missed opportunity. That was I don't remember having any problem with the episode whatsoever, but I was like, I thought for sure I was almost excited because I was like, oh, that's a great idea. They great. And then they didn't do it. And that is, they took pains to establish the fact that someone on the station has actual bullets and a revolver. When they go to Zahadum, of course, take the revolver because they won't scan for that. Instead, he just has another energy weapon in his hip. I'm like, oh, that's so lame. Like, come on, man, we have a revolver. This is Chekhov's revolver. If you're going to show the revolver, it has, in a futuristic world, Chekhov's revolver 2.0, it has to be used for some reason why an antiquated weapon would be appropriate here. So that is literally the only thing I didn't like. That didn't have anything to do with the episode. That's a later episode, right? So.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point. It's I don't know. My heart breaks for the show sometimes because they're doing so much, and I love so much of it. And sometimes I'm like, oh, I wish they could have done a little bit more. But I know that at the time it would have been very difficult. Like they're already really, really pushing the limits of what you can do in serializing the story and. Also, I mean, it's just done under such insane circumstances, like low budget, one guy writing every episode. And running the show and doing all the other stuff at the same time. And I mean, Straczynski aged like 900 years.
I'm sure. Well, and also, like I said, so to me, it was strange to hear you say that was like this big, like a lot of people don't like that episode. Because I was like, I didn't think I was, Totally didn't. I don't even remember there being anything I didn't like in that episode, to be honest. So
no, it's a perfectly all right episode. It just doesn't have some big emotional impact or something. But
I guess I can see that.
But I agree that it's perfectly decent. There's a couple of funny lines, some nice performances. There's some other plot stuff happening in the B story that's nice.
And I liked him going up. They showed him going up the elevator, counting to 3 seconds. Like, I guess I just like minutia. I'm for some reason I'm a viewer who likes minutia. And if you show me someone doing something that feels like what they would really do in the real world, somehow I just delight in that. And I'm sure everyone else is going, why are they showing this? It's so boring. And I'm like, no, I loved it. So I don't know. I guess I
agree. I love that. It's a great concept. Like I do wish the episode had done more, but I do really like the concept of just wait, is there a floor missing? That's like something you could really imagine happening. It is always nice when the show goes for those things. We'll see how
we will reconvene.
How it continues for you.
But as usual, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It's a lot of fun. And thanks for sharing so much stuff about the series, because obviously, like, you know so much more about it than I do. It's great to hear all the other stuff. Like, for example, the Talia Winters part. I wouldn't have even known that when watching the series, and I would have been just like, God, that was weird, the plotline drop. I probably wouldn't have given it a second thought. But because you had said that, I was like, oh man, like like my heart almost breaks for the writers in that one, because I'm like, that seemed like a great idea, and it just sometimes
I
you have
agree.
to just call an
That's
audible and be
me.
like, well, oh well,
Yeah, yeah, but it was so, it has such an eeriness to it,
yeah,
and an emotional intensity.
yeah,
It is a shame. As it is, it kind of works, at least for Ivanova, kind of as
yes, that's true.
but I guess these things just happen when you make a show over so many years.
It's something I never think about, but is one of those things that you're like, yeah, we get to just like watch and criticize the final product, but like, man, I mean, all of the like reality that goes into show running, because I mean, I've seen the reality that goes into video games, right? And then someone talks about what they didn't like in a video game, and I'm like, yeah, and I agree, but also you have no idea how crazy it is to do this stuff. It's a disaster every day, always, and I'm sure that is exactly the same as it was on Babylon 5. So it is actually always remarkable that they pulled it off at all, right?
Yeah, I am sometimes very, very critical of some things that are happening nowadays in the arts. So there's types of decisions that I'm, not exactly nice about.
Yeah,
But other types of problems, like the things that arise not from you making a bizarre choice to be very dogmatic about
yeah,
something, but that come from the difficulties of the format itself, I am much more forgiving about, and I understand very well because I've been through it. And
yeah,
same with video games. I used to play video games and be like, oh wow, that writing choice is really bad. Why did
yeah,
they do this?
yeah,
And now I'm like, yeah, they didn't have any choice.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Like it's
yeah,
whenever I make a video game, I work in a video game, and it comes out well, it's a fucking miracle.
yeah, yep,
Uh,
yep,
because like people say, oh, this scene here doesn't work very well. I'm like, you have no idea how hard I fought for there to be even a scene that you can vaguely understand in that point.
yeah,
You think that there's a story at all in this game, let alone a story that makes sense, is I once said the story before, but I'll say it again. I once worked on the thing for like 2 years, and then built up this giant world. And then they were like, yeah, the intro we have just decided in the last 5 minutes should be 40 seconds long.
yeah, yeah.
Like, I spent 2 years building this, and you want me to do it in 40 seconds? Well, yeah, it's gonna suck. And this happens to every single person working in any field like that. And just as one additional thought about this, imagine how much better things would be if shows got like, you have 3 years, that's it, or 5,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
we're just going to give you that
yeah,
from the get-go.
yeah,
Tell it in that. After that, it's over. If you really fuck up, maybe we'll cancel you, but generally speaking, you have this amount of time to do the story. And because I keep thinking about shows that I love that either just end,
yeah,
like I'm watching something, I'm really into it, I'm really enjoying it, dead.
yeah,
Like, or it's this kind of thing where they know that it is ending, but they have to compress everything and it's not as good, or they got funding 5 years later to do an ending, and then it just doesn't quite match. Like on Farscape, like one of the characters who's an alien sounds different in the finale that they funded like ages after the original series, because they lost like the voice filters for it and they couldn't recreate the effect exactly.
okay,
And it's so fucking tragic. It's a great performance, a great effect. I love the show. And then it's just the end doesn't match. And I feel incredibly sorry for them, because it's just that just as the show was at its best, they got canceled. And how much better would everything be if people just had a guarantee, this is what you get, tell it in that. Even if it was like, just 30 episodes or something, but that they knew that they weren't constantly fighting this threat of cancellation. And do I tell the story in this much or that much, or do I have this actor or that actor?
Well, and except for the people with incredibly established track records and a lot of clout in Hollywood or wherever they're making the show, you obviously also have the problem where everybody has their own pet idea, right? Like, I mean, I've heard many times about how people want you to do X or Y. I mean, you mentioned it on Babylon 5 that they added a fighter pilot who presumably was never part of the original really design of the series. Like, he wasn't really supposed to have the kind of scenes he had. But it's just like, yeah, I mean, you don't, unless you are a really big name brand, you're Steven Spielberg or somebody who just people are just going to like defer to because it's too scary not to. You get probably all of these people poking and prodding you, telling you that the series will be a hit if you just do their stupid idea, and they're an executive with a lot of authority. It all sounds like a terrible process. It really does.
It does, yeah, and it is very frequently the same in games as well. Not always. I've had some very good experiences, but I mean, it's the same kind of thing. It's like, Minecraft came out and was very successful. Can you add blocks and building to this racing game?
Yeah. Yeah.
Spider-Man movie was very successful. Can you have the shadows bite someone and he gets
Yeah.
shadow superpowers?
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
idiotic stuff happens sometimes, and you think, why did anyone do that? And the answer is someone told them to.
Yep.
And they couldn't say no.
Someone who signs the checks.
Yeah. And there's a real problem there. There's a really, really big problem there.
Well, on that note, we should sign off. Thank you so much. Sorry. Thank you so much, Jonas, for joining us today. And thanks all of you out there for watching. We'll be back here again in a couple of weeks to do season 4. Until then, everyone, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.